one of them is like he makes an inductive step that's like valid, but the meaning of the proposition has changed because when he like the proposition in his head, like the internal state, it applies to his out. It's true. So
you can like just use it every.
so maybe that's what fact that there's an example where it's true at the same time that they can't be semantically equivalent. They can't necessarily be semantically equivalent. It could be like contingent, but that's not enough. Okay. So that's my fault. That's at least what I think. But it's like a loose kind of thing. The other one's a little more problematic because I don't actually know what you do about that. It's yeah, I don't know.
John, did you bring your computer? Did you bring your computer? Yeah, dog. Hey, doggy. Oh, it's Hunter. That's Liam's dog. Hunter's pretty fantastic.
Oh, I love these.
Oh,
So page 2 is weird because it's like the so if you do any, I mean, it would be weird. It's just weird in the sense that like I'm not going to sit around and say, well, I know this one thing, so I'm just going to make as many or statements as I want and then happen to get lucky, right? Because it's so that I think is unjustified. It's not. So that's not a case of justified truth because it doesn't seem like a justified belief to have. Right? Like, why would you justify having that belief?
But the two like the disjunct, he is justified to believe it because someone in the office says, you know, according to the story, whatever.
That's not disjunct. That's different. That's the first one. That's just if.
I have to look at it. It's been a while since I saw it.
Oh yeah, well we'll talk about it. I just like I hate them. I don't know why. I've always said like, and I'm not even okay. I'm definitely leaning toward JCB a little bit. So that's maybe why I hate them so much. But there's also like we can talk about.
You still can. There's no reason why you can't. You still believe JGB. It's just
Well, there's just reductive problems that it's cynicism. But no, but like internalist and externalist views of like justification, like that's something we'd have to expand on. Like, that's one of the assumptions. I'm like, we're just not assuming that. Like we're gonna stay agnostic, but there's a ton that we could talk about. I know you're more like that's more your side of the coin. Because I haven't even met the system.
That's always I'm always curious of like what is reasonable to believe. Like again, should we just say that we're all agnostic about the spaghetti monster?
Yeah, already did it. Give it a second.
Well, what time is it now?
Yeah, we can wait for Alex to start it off and then we can talk about all
Sure.
this stuff.
I'm gonna be taking lots of notes because I don't know all all the terminologies.
Same. So like
it's a teaching moment.
I've been slowly learning. They've been graceful and being patient with me while I learn. Okay, so what I'm gonna do. I'm going to go to the event page. Oh, yes, that's a lot. Ooh.
We started. Like,
On the YouTube we have, but on Facebook.
There's a YouTube?
yeah, we have YouTube now.
How fancy?
Okay, can you do me a favor? Can you go onto your computer and go?
Maybe.
Oh, the thing is up. Can you do like a? Is it mirrored display right now? Is it mirrored or is it?
Actually, yeah, I think it's mirrored.
Okay.
No, it's not because it has presentation mode on the other side. But if I exit out, it's gonna. I still think that's mirrored. I think it's just a setting within PowerPoint that does that. I just don't want to change too much. What was the thing that you wanted to do?
So I want to get the YouTube link so we can.
Do you have the YouTube one?
No, I'm on the YouTube page, so this is just like. live right now. So you think,
No.
we don't actually need the YouTube link. All we need is a Facebook. Because why we divert people to go on two platforms, right? Let's make sure they're all concentrated on one. And YouTube is just for cataloging,
Right.
True.
so we can just keep it. And eventually, you can maybe build a presence, but it's not as necessary.
Yeah.
So we do like a live hangout, YouTube?
So,
Or
so,
do the Facebook?
so like YouTube's live right now.
No, we just-
Yeah, we just have to get the link and send it to people.
But that's what we're.
But that's what Facebook Live.
Yeah, exactly. That's what.
Because they would have to go to Facebook to get to YouTube, but we're streaming on, or we're about to be streaming on Facebook, so we might as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
why you have two.
Uh-huh.
Leave on.
Well, then here's a two tablet so you can take, like, field comments as we go. What time is it?
6:11.
Okay.
Okay, let me just get some of my friends to come on. Oh, today is Sunday?
Yeah.
Who is that? Okay. Who's my- Okay, do you want to go live on the Facebook? And I can just bring people to that.
I'm trying to think. So Spencer sits there. Does that block the Wayne Smith sign?
Or Spencer's, I think.
Yeah. I don't think it will. That much.
Yeah, not much. You can also sit on that side. So you can get a full.
Spencer, we need you to move.
We need you to go polar opposite side.
We always said, we can always do it next time.
Mm-hmm.
Are we on live? And we're live. Cool. Let's do the first. Oh wait, go on Facebook and see. I think we are.
I like blocking this sign.
I'm about to be able to tell you that.
Oh.
Actually, no. You're pretty. You're okay.
No, Sarah is. Sarah's just gonna do the live stream.
Those chips are the bomb. Where did you get it?
From Safeway. These are probably so much for salt and pepper. These are the crinkle cut. I didn't know.
Oh, I love salt and pepper.
You're live, right? On Facebook?
Mm-hmm. Is that your notebook from the technology?
I found this from Reynolds, yeah.
I'm excited.
Good job.
All the notes that I should have.
Oh, the
to
problem is.
I have like 3 of these,
it's out of
I
power.
think 3 or 4 of these
Oh,
notebooks full of.
You can plug it in.
I tried one of them.
Yeah, I have like all my,
Oh, wait, can I?
like all my notebooks from every class I've ever been in somewhere. Fit some in. I don't know mine too. I don't know if I've ever, actually that's not true. When I was in like 101 and 103 and stuff, I definitely refer to that stuff as I moved on in philosophy. Like if there was something I just had to like fact check myself on, I would go back to my 101 notebook. Because I had Watson, he's like super thorough, so all the stuff is real helpful to have. Well, you blocked with I don't know if I'll come. It's okay. At some point.
Well, it's either block that or block that.
So do the comments.
Actually, I think if you stop. No, you'd be fine. Yeah, I don't know. Doesn't matter. We'll change it. We'll go back and look at it, and then if we have to adjust anything, we will. It's kind of like last week where everyone's in their habit. Like, how is it here?
Okay, what about it?
Okay, hold on. I think it should be good now. I think it should be good. I appreciate it. You just leave it up. Dual shielding.
Always got the double iPad.
Nah, two else
Which is funny because they're exactly the same place.
Oh, handy.
What we're going to do a small icebreaker too, which is extremely important, and something I will continue to harp on probably for the rest of my life.
we need an icebreaker?
Because I need to know where everyone stands on a very important issue
Oh,
in philosophy.
okay.
Whether you're a fallibleist or infallibilist.
Oh,
No, not that.
No.
More important.
More important than that.
Way more important.
And get my notebook out soon.
I might be being facetious right now. It's like, I think it's funny. It's fun.
okay.
Maybe the internet people will think it's funny too. Actually, if something I posted on our page that no one reacted to, I'm totally bitter about it. Alright, cool.
Yeah, we all set up. I shared it to a bunch of people, so hopefully they'll come on within the next few minutes.
Yep.
And we can just get started with that.
Alright, cool. Alright, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the second meeting
Oh, Matt's on. Hey, Matt.
of Philosophers with Attitude. That's what, I don't even know if we said that last time. That's what P.W.A. stands for. I was inspired by N.W.A. Actually, you could make it apply to anything. So, yeah, so this is our second meeting. Thanks to the Wayne Smith for hosting us. We are very appreciative of it. It's better than like sitting out in like the hot sun today. So today we're going to talk about knowledge kind of broadly, but then specifically Gettyer's counterexamples. So I had a professor, it was my theory of knowledge professor, Professor Reynolds. We have two ways to get famous doing philosophy. You can either be like Plato or Kant, or I guess Kant didn't actually write that much, but you can either write a lot and a lot and a lot and a lot, and everyone will know you, or you can be Gettier and write one paper that was like 2 pages long. Well, not only one, but publish one paper that was like 2 pages long and completely shift the ground on everyone else. Do I need to volume?
Yeah, there it is. A little bit.
It's picking up fine on. This is not how loud I was last.
Really?
Are you looking at them?
No, like a friend of mine saying it's a little bit low.
Oh, okay.
Wait, can you hear us now?
The audio's coming through those phones.
It should.
Yeah, but it was working last time.
We
though.
did it last week.
Mhm.
They're kind of far away.
Yeah, they're closer than they were last time.
Were they?
Yeah.
Yo, Matt, how's the volume? It's gonna take a bit to get to. But
I'm trying to think of why it would be so. Huh. Well, yeah. Okay, I'll try to be loud. It's not too hard. So yeah, so we're gonna be talking about Gettyer's counterexamples. He published this paper. It was like 2 pages. It was 2 pages, and it had 2 cases and kind of a brief description. And it's been people are still stuck on trying to solve the Gettier problem or some of the counterexamples that he.
Yeah, it just overturned the entire field of epistemology.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been the same since.
No.
When was this paper published?
1964, 1967,
Yeah.
Wow.
Years ago. I mean,
in the 60s. And then since then, it's just been a sort of race to reduce, to find the necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge. But we'll get to that.
yeah, but it's been interesting because it's like there's kind of been like a divide. So there's been like people that have kind of given up on the job of basically reductionistic epistemology, where they're like, we're going to get it down to like this one thing that we can kind of work with. And some people are like, no, we're not going to do that. And some people have like drilled even further down, where they picked like one condition and they're like, let's keep going down there. And then maybe, hopefully, there's a pot of gold at the end of that rabbit's hole. But it doesn't seem like there is. So we'll talk about that later in the presentation. So yes, justified true belief knowledge, which is also the title of this paper, which you should be able to have access to if you go to the Facebook event. We have a Google Drive set up, so now we can actually share the papers that we're kind of pulling a lot of stuff from. It's also like a good way to, if we find an article that's really interesting on some more contemporary issue, we can get access to it for everyone. So just like a good way to kind of keep our philosophical chops up. So yeah, we're going to be discussing Gettyer's counterexamples and knowledge more generally. But first, the most important issue of the day, real hot button topic. Where the hell do you stand in the sandwich alignment chart? I need to know. I'm so sorry.
Wait, what?
Sandwich alignment chart. Pick a position and stay there. So I'll give you, for me, right now, I am a structure purist ingredient rebel. So it's like, you gotta pick where your section is. And this is basically telling you what you're committed to. So I am committed to ice cream between waffles. I am fully willing to take that bullet.
It's
for,
called an ice cream sandwich.
yeah, exactly. But I don't know if I'm here. Like I don't know if I. There's a description of what you are, so think about it.
Is it literally any food? Okay.
So this all started because in the undergraduate philosophy club at ASU, we did a whole discussion. Air quote, it was mostly me yelling at people about whether hot dogs are sandwiches, and I am vehemently opposed to hot dogs being a sandwich. Mostly because there's a great ASU, his name's super cool dude. He has a really interesting test. I don't know who we got it from, but it's like, how do you know if something is a sandwich? You know, whatever country you're in, if you ask for a sandwich or if someone asked you for a sandwich and you handed them a hot dog, they'd probably be like, well, okay, that's kind of close, but you're still an asshole. Right, so that's like a good
What's the
measure.
definition of a sandwich?
So this is where you,
Depends.
yeah, it's unclear. So this is actually, it's funny because this plays into kind of what we're going to talk about today with definitions, but it doesn't look like we can give a precise definition for like what makes something a sandwich. Because like, so we're used to thinking of sub-sandwiches as sandwiches. I don't know about tacos. Tacos are pretty far. I mean, I think I'm willing to say that a sub-sandwich is a sandwich, but if you do, it seems like the hot dog's not far away. So I think maybe subs aren't sandwiches at all. It's a different thing for some reason. Pop-Tart, that's hardcore. It's you're just and you want to
My friend says laptops are sandwiches.
laptops. Laptops are not sandwiches.
Silly, Matt.
That would be
Pure science day.
They're not even food. Maybe if you have laptops as food. I do need to know where people stand on this.
I don't know.
Using Travis's example, I'm probably the same structural neutralist ingredient purist. A sub is a sandwich. I mean, you got the bread and the meat. It's like from where I'm from, if you ask, can I get a sandwich, and someone gives you that, you're gonna be like, cool, that's a sandwich. Hot dog, it's like what but if you're going by like just the definition and like you go back to what is it, like the Earl of Sandwich, the dude who was first like, what is it? They're like the legend goes that they're playing a poker game and he's like they would serve them meats, like these fine like meat slices of meat, and he was like, you know what? He's like playing cards, whatever. Like he told like his butler or whatever, like bring me 2 pieces of bread. I'm gonna put the meat in between the bread and eat it so his hands don't get greasy or something when he's playing poker.
Interesting.
So it's like the burrito, I would go as far as to be a structural rebel, ingredient neutral.
Yeah,
Because you could, I mean, according to the legend, like that is you're like it's something food
yeah.
enclosed in something so your hands don't get sticky when you're playing cards. So I'm anywhere between those, but a Pop-Tart is not a freaking sandwich.
Yeah.
Okay, so
That's a wrap. Okay,
radical
so,
sandwich anarchy is off entirely.
yeah. So my friend Matt, he was saying he's a structural purist and an ingredient anarchist.
What?
Ingredient.
Well, it's not on there, but
Ingredient rebel? You have to be an ingredient rebel.
no, he's
Oh, so he's saying,
A structural
so it
purist.
doesn't have to be food. Okay, so he's with the laptop.
it doesn't have to be food.
Well played.
Well,
There should be
So
a
it's
little
like
sticky
if it has the format ABA.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh.
This goes back to
Oh my gosh.
all sandwiches are stacks, but not all stacks are sandwiches.
Oh my god.
You brought that up.
Philosophical
Mm-hmm.
philosophical insight, everyone.
Well, he disagrees with his
Ingredients do not have to
anarchy.
be edible, he says.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know about that, but okay.
So all stacks are sandwiches.
No, ABA, because you could have a stack. So there's alternating. So like, okay, so for instance, remember the apple example?
Mhm.
So like, let's say you gave me 3 slices of green apple, just like stacked. That's not a sandwich. If you put like a Granny Smith in between the 2 green apples, that would be a sandwich, because it's a stack, but it's different. All sandwiches are stacks, and all stacks are sandwiches. That's why I'm a structure purist. The sandwich, I don't want to go, it's too close to a hot dog. I'm not willing to go down that path.
And for anyone listening that thinks this is just a bunch of philosophers talking a bunch of crap, this actually went to like some Supreme Court case and it matters
It does.
for
Dude,
businesses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Oh, it makes sense. Though.
like a hot dog vendor wanted to sell hot dogs in a mall where there already was a sandwich store, like one of the traditional hardline sandwiches, and they're saying hot dogs are not sandwiches, and they're saying yeah they are, and there was a big debate. And I think the court case fell in favor of
It not being a sandwich?
a hot dog not being a sandwich. Yeah.
Good common sense.
I think that's what
I would
happened.
say probably not, but appeals to common sense are difficult. So, does anyone have a stand on this?
Can you say it one more time?
Do you have a?
I don't know.
This is a very good chart. This is Travis provided this to us.
Oh really?
Yeah.
You made this?
No, he found it. He
Found
sent
it,
it to
okay.
me, and I put it out there for the world to see.
This is in line.
Okay, I don't think ice cream taco is a sandwich. So
Okay.
I'm not there. Ice cream sandwich, I'm kind of with it.
So you're not an ingredient rebel. Oh, so maybe you are an ingredient rebel, but you care about structure.
I care about structure.
You care about structure.
Wait, but so like, I don't because like, so a sub is a sandwich, maybe. That's like a maybe.
So you're probably like me, structure purist, ingredient rebel.
Exactly.
Now my whole thing for like saying subs aren't is because I don't want to go down to the hot dog, so that's why I'm like just cutting that out entirely.
Wait, I have a question. Why is a sub sandwich structurally neutral? It's still,
It's
you're a
because-
structural purist.
No, it's because a sub traditionally is like a
It's not
loaf.
cut all the way through.
Yeah.
It's like a hot dog. Oh,
Yeah, it's
gotcha.
more like a hot
You
dog
can't
bun.
see the back
It's
side
like
of
a
it.
bun. Yeah, so that's the container must be on either side of the top.
Seems like Subway cuts all the way through, and so does
Do they?
Jimmy John's doesn't, but Subway.
I mean, usually it ends up that way. Just
Oh
'cause
no,
of,
they
like,
don't.
no,
They don't.
Jimmy
They
John's
totally
doesn't.
don't.
Subs are
Right,
weird.
subs are
And
like-
actually, Subway in the beginning they actually cut like the top of the bread. So and there's like they're called, I think they're called New England, or they're like there's some sort of bun. It's like a New England bun, and it's cut on the top instead of the side. So it's like a New England hot dog bun.
Oh, weird.
So it's like a loaf, and then it's split in the middle instead of on the side. And that's actually a lot of early subs were that way too.
What about like right here, having a bowl of soup that's inside of like the end of the loaf
Yeah,
of
so
bread?
that looks weird. So if you're a structure rebel, contain any food developed in any way by containing food. Okay, yeah, so bowls wouldn't count unless it was an edible bowl.
Yeah,
And
that's
then-
what I'm saying. Like you get the bread bowl soup.
Yeah, then you are a structure rebel. That would be a sandwich.
So then
That's
let me get a
sandwich.
soup
yeah,
sandwich.
triples.
We'll get a bread bowl sandwich. Like what? Excuse me.
Yeah,
Excuse me. A clam chowder bread bowl would be a sandwich if you're a structure rebel.
Clam chowder sandwich.
I'll think I fuck with it.
Because it would be enveloping. You
Yeah,
got
it
bowl.
seems to take it too far.
Wait.
Yeah, I think I'm with structural peers.
Yeah, but what would the Earl of Sandwich say about a clam chowder sandwich?
He would ask you why you're trying to eat soup and play poker at the same time.
Right? He
Well,
wouldn't think that was a sandwich.
I mean, the appeal to the historical origin, or whether it's true or not, is like, okay, I'm playing a game. I don't want my hands to get greasy. I want to be able to do this with one hand and play poker at the same time. This seems fine. But then it gets a bit. I mean, he
Yeah.
might think, oh, the sub sandwich is perfect. 'cause
The
then I
hot
don't have to
dog
worry about it leaking.
The hot dog would totally be a sandwich to the Earl of Sandwich.
I don't know, because think about
So
it.
would that.
So
Yeah,
what was that- what was
that's
the-
what I'm saying.
hold on,
Like if the sub was a sandwich, I'll kind of say.
When was the last time you ate a
Exactly.
hot dog from the bottom like this, though, and like try to do this?
That doesn't
Because that would
matter.
be the function of it
No,
not.
so
you're
here's the
trying to do
thing.
it without dirtying
It's
your
like
hands.
an Earl
You
of Sandwich
do-
taking one big piece of bread and just like sandwiching. And that's another thing is there doesn't have to be a sandwich can be. This is one point that I thought was interesting was it doesn't have to be a noun, it can be a verb. To sandwich
Yeah.
something is a verb. So the ice cream is sandwiched in between some waffle cone, so it's verbing right now.
Mhm.
Right.
Right, these are sort of also, but the Pop-Tart isn't. So according to the verb way, the function way of looking at it, it's like,
If you had two
You're-
Pop-Tarts,
Yeah.
though. Ice cream.
Yeah, I don't know. I might go with it if it was like.
But then the
two
Pop-Tart would
But
cease
the
to be.
Pop-Tart itself is not.
Yeah, Pop-Tart bites. That's dumb. My friend Josh, he said he worked at Subway, and
You're
he's saying
sandwich artist.
yeah. So he was like, they are only one piece of bread. So he's
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
verification.
exactly. So yeah, so it's like
It's one.
yeah, since it's one piece of bread, I'm not with the sandwich thing.
Wait, so sub sandwiches aren't sandwiches?
I think subs are its own little thing.
It's a sub.
It's just
It's
shoving
like
it
a grinder.
it's
It's like grind. So but that's the interesting thing. It's like that's form of food, I'm not gonna call it the word that starts with an S and ends with a which. It's called different things, like, so it's sometimes it's a grinder, hoagie, sub, depending on
Or it has
where.
different names.
Yeah.
There are
and-
different names of various sandwiches.
Of different switches. The something, the switches. So yeah. Do you have a, are you committed to any?
I have two philosophies, depending on my mood.
Which is?
At first I was gonna say, like, I would call it a hot dog is a sandwich, and when I heard, Spencer, I would say, could be also a structure rebel ingredient neutral, without, and I would not say that Pop-Tart is a sandwich. But if I would be okay with saying a hot dog is not a sandwich if I can say an ice cream sandwich is an oxymoron.
So what?
Oh, because it
What's
doesn't,
the oxymoron?
it doesn't help.
Ice cream sandwich. The thing is, if I can be in the boat of saying a hot dog is a sandwich, and I would just also say that a burrito is a sandwich, or I could say hot dog is not a sandwich, but I don't believe that ice cream sandwich is a sandwich. I would be hardline traditionalist then.
Hard one. Oh, okay.
So I-
you wouldn't be, wait, you wouldn't be structural purist ingredient neutral? Because
Yeah.
like, so if I took, I don't know, put French fries between two pieces.
Yeah, but I
of
feel like a
bread,
vegan, like a weird vegan, can still make a sandwich.
A
Yeah.
weird vegan.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you don't have to have meat and lettuce
It's
and
a
all that
weird
shit.
vegan.
Yeah,
You can put whatever you want. Like, go into the, when you come home drunk and you like put some chicken nuggets in there and like non-sandwich ingredients, like barbecue sauce. I don't know, very non-traditional. You still have, you should not get a freaking
Then
sandwich.
if that's the case, a sub is also a sub should be a sandwich.
No, but I think where I come from is like with the structure, like with like subs, it's like one piece of bread, and so what I think is sandwich between.
Right.
So, like, when you have
verb
one
and
thing,
food has to be.
It's like the meat with like a sub and a hot dog. The meat and the stuff are inside of the bread, as opposed to between the bread.
Right.
I mean, the thing is, what's the difference between a sub and your structural purist ingredient neutral if you can also just cut the that one bread into two?
But then it ceases to be a sub. I would say it's no longer a sub. So, I mean, then it becomes weird because it's like you had one thing that was one divided, but presumably sliced bread is the same way. It was at one point one loaf that was sliced away for it to be slices.
So then why is a chip butter a sandwich if, it's
Or
not
chip
the,
buddy.
a chip buddy?
Because it's sliced bread. I guess we should clarify what a buddy is. It's like an English word for like, it's literally just French fries between sliced bread.
Wait, what else is in there? Like ketchup?
Oh yeah,
and
that's
chicken?
like ketchup, usually like HP sauce and like mayo or something.
That's definitely a sandwich.
Or butter. There's usually butter in there too.
It's just a funky sandwich.
It's a sandwich. Yeah, well, because the sandwiching, there's like between things. And that
Like, you make a sandwich, like
it's ABA.
yeah, let's sandwich between two people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good.
No, yeah.
Like Oreos are Oreo sandwiches.
Maybe a more
I
specific.
think
Oreos
Oreos
are
are sandwiches.
If I asked for a sandwich and someone handed me an Oreo, I'd be like, no.
It's a cookie sandwich.
Maybe,
But though, like, what defining property? Like, I'm still going with the between thing.
Yeah.
It literally says chocolate sandwich cookies.
Done. Let's go home.
This actually, this makes me wonder if I would actually be ingredient rebel. I might be ingredient neutral, but because I don't know. If I asked for a sandwich and someone handed me an Oreo, I wouldn't be happy about that.
It doesn't say sandwiched cookies. It's just chocolate sandwich cookies.
So it's still a sandwich, the antigens. the end,
It
like,
depends on context. But
It seems that they're going by the
the
verb.
ABA.
the
It's-
the
then it's
mega
weird.
stuff is being sandwiched between cookies.
But then it's weird because okay, so it's a chocolate sandwich cookie, but the chocolate isn't the thing being sandwiched, so that's kind of confusing.
So comment from Matt, he says,
Start talking
I
about
don't-
epistemology.
Yeah, he said- before we do that, he says, I don't think I've ever heard someone ask for a sandwich without clarifying what kind of sandwich they want.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, even in ingredient purists, you might end up with tuna or roast beef.
What kind of sandwich?
Yeah.
But like, yeah. So at the extremes though, it's like if
Yeah.
you like your roommate's out, for instance, and he's like, oh, do you want me to grab you a sandwich on the way back? And he tells you
But-
he's somewhere getting a sandwich.
There's like
And
an
you're like, yeah, that'd be
unspoken-
awesome. And then
You get an Oreo.
no, but then he like I don't know. He stops at the Circle K and gets me an ice cream sandwich on the way home.
But there's
yeah.
like an unspoken assumption in that it's saying like, yeah, we haven't had lunch, I'm hungry, you want to pick me up a sandwich.
Yeah,
You-
that,
you
you're
would-
gonna get a sandwich.
If someone
from-
brings you a dessert, you're just like, what the hell? It doesn't matter. So it's not the matter of it still being an ice cream sandwich. It's a matter of like it not being lunch. It's dessert.
Right, fair enough.
So it's like
Oh yeah, like the state of which you're at currently.
yeah, like oh, you want me to pick you up some lunch? Yeah, I'll get you a sandwich.
Yeah,
so
that's-
you
you're kind
expect
of
a
expecting lunch.
sandwich.
A lunch
instead
sandwich,
of
yeah.
Ice cream.
So that's
Yeah.
that's like
Because
it
it's
goes
all-
to his point is that you're assuming it's always within a context. Like
Yeah.
let me have an ice cream sandwich. All right, and then waiter will bring you dessert.
Yeah.
Yeah, but imagine like something where it's not as drastic as ice cream or like a supplement. Yeah. I don't know. So
Like-
just a sub, yeah.
Like we could
So, like,
we could
let's
start a
say-
business and we could have like we could call it just sandwiches and stuff or just sandwiches. Yeah, official sandwich store and just have all of this and people are like, look at a Pop-Tart sandwich.
That would be dope. I see that happen.
People would just be
So
arguing
yeah,
online.
just imagine, just
No,
imagine.
but you have sandwiches all
And
and
but imagine like you're having a party.
all the kinds.
What?
all the time.
So going back to like maybe structure, maybe instead have a Pop Tart with another ingredient and then another Pop Tart, and then you get a Pop Tart actually a Pop Tart
Yeah,
sandwich.
but
Exactly.
like
So, like-
ice cream.
So like
Yeah, but then you're up to like structure.
Yeah,
so like
Oh,
honestly
okay.
if it's like if eating a hot dog, have you ever eaten a hot dog and like the middle part gets like severed? So now
Yeah, so I've done that. We like to put two pieces of bread and slice the hot
Yeah,
dog so it lays flat.
Oh no, not that, but like the bread like splits in half.
Like my hot
Yeah,
dog
that's-
hoagie now is all of a sudden a hot dog sandwich.
Hot dog
I'm down. I'm with that.
That is too technical.
I don't know.
No, like, so imagine your
It's
friends.
between, sandwich between
But
something
it's,
now.
it's still sandwiched.
No,
Though.
but imagine your friends are having a
Between
cookout.
one piece of bread and now two pieces of bread.
No, but you can't sandwich one piece of bread.
No, so imagine like you're having a cookout and your friends like, oh yeah, we're having sandwiches. Awesome, you get there, it's all hot dogs. Like that seems.
No, they would have to say we're having hot dog sandwiches, and you go there and you're serving hot dogs, and you're like, this is a delicious hot dog sandwich. And they would say, I'm very good at barbecue.
I don't know.
And
But I know
that's-
hot dog is hot dog somehow describes both the sausage itself and the thing with the bun. Like so if someone says like, do you want a hot dog and they hand me a hot dog on a plate, yeah, I get that. Like that makes sense to me.
Just the dog.
Yeah.
Right. Then that's not a
And then-
sandwich.
No, it's just a hot dog. But then like why does that equally apply? And then maybe that's we should
Because
be
it's
more.
not sandwiched.
Yeah, well it's just the hot dog. It's just literally the anyway. We're off the rails. Okay, so on to the thing we're supposed to talk about. So we're talking about is justified true belief knowledge. And here's counterexamples to that. So this is a brief outline. So we're going to talk about knowledge as justified true belief, JTB. Those terms will kind of be used interchangeably. They're interchangeably. What we mean by justified true belief, is by that we mean belief, truth, and justification.
Oh my god.
So yeah, we're gonna get into the weeds there a little bit. Then we'll talk about Getty's counterexamples, and I took the cases from the articles like straight out of it, and I took screenshots, and they're together, so we'll be able to read them on the screen, which is helpful. So case one, case two, and then we'll be taking stock of where we go from there. Mostly how did we get lost in the weeds. Okay, so traditionally, and by that I mean the Greeks, knowledge has been defined as a justified true belief. I think it was like Socrates had like kind of mentioned those as conditions, but it was like Plato that was kind of like, yeah, justified true belief. Well, I guess Socrates didn't write anything down, so it was Plato, justified true belief.
And the way he said, he didn't say it was justification. He said like a true belief with an account or something that's like tied down for some reason.
Yeah.
So, but it's basically having a justification.
Yeah. But it's like how we think of like justification in terms of like some actually, well, why do you believe that? You have to give some like reason or account of why it's the case.
Yeah, like he was basically, in the thesis, he's basically asking what's the difference between a true belief and knowledge? Because you can have a true belief and not know it.
Yeah.
Like, you can just get lucky.
Yeah.
You could be walking down the road and think that it's leading to some place.
And it is.
And it is, but if you're just, it's just a matter of luck. You didn't really know that you were on the right road.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, there's always been like a real trying to like, because knowledge is something, so this is like one of the things that even like linguistically it's good to like note is that like when we, like knowledge is something you attribute to someone. And so with like, truth is something that it can really actually be independent of people, probably, which I think so. And then with belief and justification, those are things we attribute to people, and so that's like why justification is extremely important to knowledge, is because when you're asking if someone knows something, part of what you're wondering is like, well, is this something I can attribute to them? Can I attribute knowledge to them as like a knower? That's probably like Reynolds would say, although he's more interested in something else, right? Like, 'cause that's how we like think of people, is like he knows things, he doesn't know things, or he knows like some things. We evaluate people on a big spectrum. So this is kind of how it plays out in terms of like logical statements. So S knows P, so S is some subject and P is some proposition. So S, some subject, knows some proposition if and only if S believes that P, so S has to believe that the proposition is the case or is like true. P is true, but that's independent of the subject. And S is justified in believing that P, so they have to believe it, P has to be true, and they have to be justified in believing that the thing is true, and it has to be for some reason. So in philosophical terms, we would say justified true belief is a sufficient condition for knowledge, at least that's what people that are proponents of JTB as being the definition of knowledge would say. And that would mean that belief, truth, and justification are all necessary conditions. So the way it usually works out is necessary condition is like something is not knowledge without that, and then the three things together are sufficient for knowledge. So no like instance of knowledge, or any time you have an instance of those three things together, you would have an instance of knowledge.
That makes sense.
And we'll play it out a little more. So if knowledge is a justified true belief, then it would follow that a belief must be justified and true to count as knowledge. There's no instance of knowledge that is not a justified true belief, and there's no instance of justified true belief that is not knowledge. So this just follows from the definition of it. So it's saying that like these are sufficient and necessary conditions. So these three must follow. And as we'll see, Gettier is going to attack one of these. And so basically, if you have these three things that follow from the definition, if you don't think knowledge is a justified true belief, then you'd have to attack one of these three also. So I'll just tell you, Gettier goes for the third one. So he thinks there's instances of justified true belief that are not knowledge.
So what this whole approach is a reductive analysis of knowledge. So we take this phenomenon that's happening in the world, people know things, and then they try to, philosophers ask, what are the ingredients to make up knowledge? So they can try to split it up into parts. And the basic parts that we're splitting it up in are truth, belief, and justification. And they say when you put all these together and you mix them up, then you can have knowledge. So it's a sort of a way to like reduce it down into these individual parts. And yeah, that's the approach that we're taking this way. There are other ways where it's like non-reducible, and maybe we'll get into that towards like after we get through the Gettier stuff. But Gettier was the one who sort of threw a wrench in the system of reductive analysis of knowledge.
Yeah. Well, that was part of it was, I mean, there was this long, it was actually very, in some sense, I guess, unphilosophical. Like, everyone was like, oh yeah, Plato had it right, JTB, and it just kind of marched on throughout history, and there wasn't much examination going on about it. It was just like kind of taken for granted, and finally someone was like, no, that doesn't seem right. And
like Bertrand Russell had a few counterexamples, like in passing in some of his writings, I think, in like the early 20th century, and then it was just, Gettier's paper just laid out the specific counterexamples, and then people were just like, oh, dang.
Yeah.
Like the necessary conditions together are either not sufficient or they're missing like a necessary condition. So it's like something's wrong. You can always find a counterexample, so that it's not like it. So the definition is non-exhaustive, basically.
Yeah. So like in philosophy of language, they talk about they don't talk about like necessary and sufficient so much. So they talk about intension and extension. So intention of like a word or a meaning is kind of more about like necessary conditions. So it's like, okay, well, what is it for this thing to mean? Like, what's the bare meaning? And then when you take that and say, well, how does that apply to the world? Like, what does that capture? Usually, if it's an imprecise concept like knowledge, which is funny enough imprecise, it captures all sorts of other things that shouldn't be captured, right? So an example that people always use is like, well, what's a chair? Right, so it seems like we could, chairs customarily have like 4 legs and a seat and like a back, but it seems like if you say, okay, that's what a chair is, and you take that out into the world, you start capturing couches, right? Because a lot of couches have 4, they have a seat, they have a back, they have 4 legs. Then someone's like, oh, well, for only like one person. So then it's like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean like if someone sits on my lap, then it's no longer, it ceases to be a chair? That seems wrong. So when we
And then stools and stumps, and you go all the way down.
yeah, because there's chairs with like a pillar, and like that's a chair still, right? Like, so when we talk about knowledge, it's like, so like let's take justified true belief and think about all the possible instances of that exist in the world. Like that's the extension of that definition, and it seems like we start capturing things that don't look like knowledge, and that's really what I think Gettier is kind of getting after. It's like, look, we can come up with all these instances where someone has this weird justified true belief, and it's all those things, but there's something they kind of didn't know still, so like it's not knowledge, it just can't be.
Right. Like if you walk in the room and there's a clock on the wall, but it's broken, but it broke exactly 12 hours ago, or 24 hours ago, or 48 hours, or whatever. So it's the same. It says the right time, but it's only because you just happen to walk in the room at that time. And say you weren't, you don't pay attention to what time it is, and someone asks you, hey, what time it is? You look at the broken clock, and you tell them, whatever it's. And then, so you have a belief, you believe it because you saw the clock. It's true, it happens to be true, but only by accident, and you have a justification.
Yeah.
You're looking at the clock, right? You have a reason to tell them. So you have all the ingredients of knowledge, but no one would say that you really know it. I mean, or maybe not nobody, someone might try to say that, but it seems intuitively that you don't know it. You just like got lucky and you're in this weird situation. So all the conditions of knowledge are met, but you don't know it. And that's like, would be, if you just have this a priori, analysis of knowledge, and you take that out into the world, you're gonna capture these instances of looking at broken clocks and thinking you know it, when it's like, no, that's not an instance of knowledge.
Yeah, or attributing it. And like that's what's even kind of weirder about it is like you may think you know it too, but then the person that asked you for the time would say they knew the time. And that seems wrong, right? Like knowledge would be attributed to you and you didn't actually have it, and that's another sort of, I guess, more like social concern.
Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe there's an argument to be made that you can know things like through testimony, and the person who testifies doesn't, like even if they don't know, you can know. Maybe, I don't know.
Weird.
Yeah, that is weird.
How can you test if someone actually truly knows something? Take for example, like if you, like a Jeopardy kind of game where you have all of these questions about things, but apparently you just happen to, like if you had questions on celebrities, etc., but you meant before you went to the Jeopardy, you just happened to meet these people. Is that truly?
It's the Slumdog Millionaire question. So, right, you've seen the movie, right?
I've heard of it.
Oh my God! Okay. Oh, this is good. I didn't know this was going to come up today. So he goes on basically who wants to be a millionaire, and he answers all the questions, and then like there's no way you can know all the answers to these questions. You're like a kid from like the slums, and so he basically gives a story for every single question he's answered. So he's basically giving his like account.
Oh my God!
So, but this is like one of the things about like knowing is like you would have to give some sort of. This is what we do though. This is like explains the social practice of, right? When someone says they know something, you ask them how they know it, and they give like a story, or they tell you they took a class this one time, or they like get really defensive and screamy.
But here's the thing, like, is Jeopardy and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire
Really
testing
knowledge? Yeah.
Are they testing knowledge? I don't think they're testing knowledge.
Mostly pop
I
culture.
think pop culture can still be knowledge, but
Yeah,
I think they're just testing for the answer.
Yeah, people have strategies of like eliminating certain answers, and then maybe they guess sometimes. So yeah, maybe they can guess right and not know it.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about knowledge, I mean, it's just like
I feel like you can derive it on them.
no, it's like we'll make a distinction later between like internalism and externalism, and being able to like
Well, you will.
know. Some people think there's a criteria of knowledge. You have to be able to know that you know something.
Yeah.
But like, if I'm like gonna feed my dog and I get out the dog food and make the noise and fill it in the bowl, and my dog knows that he's about to be fed, right? So it's not like, so he can't even like he can't like explain a justification. He doesn't know that he knows, but he just like has a belief that's true and it's justified because the same thing happens every day at 5:30 or whatever.
But here's the question: someone could just argue that that can just be again luck. Like I was talking with Alex about a while ago about the fact that sure you have a bridge that is built and it's for 5 years it's been like sturdy. But what happens if some kind of structural failure is there? But it just happens lucky that everything's pulled together that that it doesn't crash.
Well, so I think there's a difference between so we don't say the people that drove across a bridge that happened to be faulty committed suicide, right? We would just say they were victims of an accident, right? So the way we attribute that to them is very different depending on what is happening. So I think it's kind of the same with knowledge, right? We say if someone has justification, they believe it happens to be true, and they're aware of the evidence that it's true, and they've made this sort of judgment based on the evidence. Then we'd say, yeah, they probably know that. There's some sort of process that's gone on, so we attribute that to them. Whereas if someone just happens to get lucky, there's no work there, and so we wouldn't attribute the same sort of thing to them.
Or there's reliabilist accounts of knowledge where the justification part, it's the external conditions to one's mind in the environment. So as long as there's a reliable connection between me pouring the dog food or whatever and the time of the day that the dog gets fed and the dog's sort of awareness that what's happening, then they know they're about to be fed. So it's the justification doesn't have to be, you have to be able to prove it or, right, and if you think it's a matter of luck, maybe I'm just cleaning out the dog bowl and the dog's mistaken, then the dog can maybe believe it but not have knowledge. So there are, each condition has to be met, right? Maybe the truth condition doesn't, the dog believes it and has a justification, but it's not true, and he doesn't know it. So all three conditions have to be met.
Yeah, so that's just kind of that's the groundwork of where we're working from. And yeah, so get here to nice 3, but we'll get there. So what do we mean by justified true belief? So this part, we're gonna get into some weeds. So I still don't know what a belief is. I have formed an opinion about what a belief is based on kind of what everyone tells me. I'm still not really sure.
What do you think it is?
It's pretty much a mental state. So a belief is a propositional attitude that some proposition is true. So if you look
Yeah.
well, it should have been EG, not IE. I apologize. So yeah, belief is a propositional attitude. It's a mental state I have towards some proposition. And it's usually a proposition I have to have in mind at the time. I don't think there's really, I mean, I'm sure I have beliefs that I can, call up at any given time. It's part of a discussion is beliefs, propositions come up and then your belief is recalled and then you can go through it.
It doesn't have to be in your conscious awareness.
No,
you can sort of forget it but then recall it. So you have a dispositional belief or something, but it's still sort of a belief.
It's still this attitude that you have to a proposition. So we're going to use example. I believe the Earth orbits the sun. So the proposition is if the Earth orbits the sun, I believe it. I think it's probably true. And usually with beliefs, we don't deal with credences so much. So it's not I have a credence associated with it. I'm 66% sure that it's the case or something. It's no, I think that they're the fact of the world that corresponds to this is that the Earth orbits the sun. So, and this is what we'll get into with the truth condition. So the idea with truth and propositions is that propositions are claims that can be true or false, and also propositions are about the world or facts about the world. So when you have a belief, that attitude that's associated with a proposition is an attitude towards some fact about the world or the way things are. And then basically what makes it true or false is how it corresponds to that fact that's out there, outside of your head.
When you say that propositions are claims that can be true or false, that means you're basically saying, is it falsifiable? Is that it can be shown? That it could be shown?
No, it's just it's a sentence that can have a truth value.
Yeah.
It's not saying pass the salt.
Yeah.
That's not a true or false. That's not a sentence that's true or false.
Oh.
A proposition is a sentence that can be true or false.
But
Like
there's
that is salt, or that isn't salt, or so
but there's also things that aren't
It just-
propositions that sound like propositions.
it doesn't have to
Propositions. So
be
like Pink
falsified.
Floyd is the greatest band in the world. That's not a. I mean, maybe it is a proposition, and it's just always false because you can't. But like, so
Right.
you have to be kind of careful like how it gets like believed. So this comes up a lot in like meta ethics. So there are some people that are basically the moral nihilists. So they think that like claims about moral facts just look like claims about moral facts. They're claims like Pink Floyd is the greatest band in the world.
You mean they're error theorists? They think every time you're saying some
Yeah, but error theorists
moral
are
proposition,
they're generally like moral nihilists.
you're in error.
They're
No.
well, they're anti, maybe not
They're not
nihilists. Nihilists.
Yeah.
My question on like
Are they
falsifiability.
Well, yeah. So
because-
presumably propositions could be falsifiable. That's true.
They don't have to be though. I could say solipsism is false. I can't falsify that. Or
You could.
solipsism is true.
No, but presumably there is some fact in the world that could falsify that. Like the world could be such that it's falsifiable. Or the world,
Well, it's falsifiable too.
it's metaphysically possible that the world is such that it was false. Or it could be metaphysically possible that the world is such that it's true.
But there are some claims that are non-falsifiable, but they're still propositions.
Right.
And thus beliefs, but maybe they cannot be justified.
Right. The justification part is like.
Okay, I think, okay.
So, but, I mean, presumably the thing is like any proposition that could be true, could in some other possible world be false. Right, so, like in this, possible worlds, I apologize, but like, so in this world, it's like necessarily the case. Well, no, that wouldn't work. Just if it's necessarily the case, then every possible world. Right, okay, so in this world, the Earth is currently the third planet from the sun, okay?
Okay,
We could like actually verify that
Yeah.
that's true. There is another possible world where we're not the third planet from the
Uh-huh.
sun, so it could be the case that it's falsifiable, even though it's not falsified. It's not false in this world.
yes.
There are some other things where it gets tricky.
Well,
Like,
there's a difference between falsified
it could be false.
or falsifiability and something is false.
But, yeah, because the one thing, again, going to it is like, is it even a belief on something like supernatural if you can't
Oh, I
like
see.
if you can't be able to test and
Confirm or
confirm.
disconfirm.
even though you could say that it's true or false,
Right.
if
Right.
you're in the state where I don't know if it's true or false because there's no way to.
So that comes down to the justification part. I
that-
can say angels exist or something, and
That's a belief, but not a justified belief.
maybe I have
That's
trouble
like-
justifying it, but it's
Oh,
still
okay.
it's a proposition. When
Okay.
I say like angels exist,
Yes, okay, I
that's
see.
a proposition because it can be either true or false.
But that doesn't mean it's justified because there's no way to say if it's definitely true or false.
Yeah, just assuming that
Okay,
the existence of angels is neither confirmable or disconfirmable.
Okay.
That's what falsifiability.
yes, that's what I was gonna.
But a belief is just a proposition, like a sentence that can have a truth value. Whether we know it or not is a different story, but
Cool,
just that's what a proposition
okay,
is.
cool.
So there maybe is some to be said about beliefs being only propositional attitudes, like maybe like there are
Is at least a propositional attitude. I guess I'm willing more to believe.
no there's like I mean they do studies on rats and stuff. Like 2 people won the Nobel Prize in like 2004 or something. They did
Oh, it's Capecchi.
they put the nodes on the rat's brain and they basically like had it like walk around a maze and like a really intricate maze, and the rat was able to like basically form a mental map of the maze, and like the rat would like go over the pathway to the food while it was asleep. It would have dreams about it, and it would like the same neural pathways would light up, and it would reinforce it when it slept, and
Isn't
would
that
go
like
and do it over and over again. So it seems like the rat eventually knew how to find the food, but it's not a proposition. It's not like it's not in sentence form. It's in map form.
Well, I don't think
And
it has
then-
to be in utterance. So that's what's interesting. So propositions are like ways of representing the way the world is, and presumably visual mapping is a proposition. It may not be explicit. Right, because
Is it?
a proposition is just like some sort of
Yeah.
like claim or portrayal of the way the world is, and so it wouldn't like mental imaging that way. I mean, okay, it's a
I
stretch.
think a lot
so
of
we're
people
used to thinking of propositions as like verbal acts or like utterances. But presumably I can have like I can have beliefs that are propositions that I never actually utter out loud, and it's still a proposition. It's not a map. It's not like if you ask me right now to like draw a diagram of the Wayne Smith, where we're meeting, by the way, it's a great place. Check them out. Plug. Yeah, like I would still be able to like draw out a map, which would be my way of like representing some facts about the world, right? It's representing facts about the world.
But your line is not going to be either true or false. It can be more accurate or less accurate.
Well, no,
It
I
has
don't
like
think
a
that's
degree
true.
of accuracy.
So like, if
But
I draw it
propositions
and I
don't have like a degree of truth or falsity. It's just either one, or it's either true or false.
well, except like, so like, let's say I draw a map and I like have an X right here that says I am here, and I don't draw a door
Right. It would
behind me
be.
to my right,
it
it
would
would be false.
Well,
You
it
would
would
say
be.
it's false.
It would just be.
It's a
well,
false representation of the
so
way the
like
house is.
maps can be coarse grain or fine grain, right? You can have a super fine grain blueprint of this place with all up down to all the details.
Right.
But say you scale it back a little bit, and you don't have like the molding around the windows or the how many.
That seems fine.
Right, it's still going to be an accurate map. So you can leave out details and it still be accurate, and you can leave out a door and it can still be like an accurate kind of blueprint of like where it is in relation to rural avenue or whatever. So there is a difference between maps and propositions, or maps and sentences. So I don't know where propositions fall.
Oh,
So that's but so I think knowledge knowledge includes more than just sentence beliefs.
yeah.
So
Be-
more than speech. I would
Yeah,
say.
because the example of the map, definitely, it's not a proposition because there's a degree, like,
Yeah.
like people might accept certain, people, for many people, it's subjective to say, okay, even though you have a diagram, if you don't have some parts of what the Wayne Smith is, they might consider it false, but for other people, depending on what their goals and what their needs are, it may or may not be accurate or not. Or I guess another thing is, does accuracy imply that does being true and does accuracy imply truth or vice versa?
No, I think that's like a category error. Right, so suppose you have a blueprint of this place, but the blueprint didn't update like the new doorway that we like blasted through this wall.
Okay.
Right, are you gonna say that the blueprint is false? No, the blueprint is, it's not true or false, it's degrees of
Yeah.
inaccurate or accurate.
Yeah. And
It's like less accurate than it could be, but it's still accurate to a very large degree, because it's.
Well, it's like accurate about some things. So like it kind of depends on the question.
Oh, yeah, so
what are
basically,
you
like,
asking?
for example, for engineering terms, you can't usually build a system or an object to complete accuracy. Mostly like you sometimes have to model things and.
Yeah, like every model is gonna leave some things out.
Oh, and this is, yeah. Now, this is going to be an aside, but this is one really, I have a jive about this because there was this professor who was a witness to Congress talking about, is it justifiable to believe in climate models? And where it says, oh no, we're not 100% sure that a climate model is completely 100% correct. Therefore, we should not act upon it. And that's definitely like, sure, like, is it 100% correct all the time? And it's a good enough representation of the world, and it gives us some degree of accuracy that we could make justified decisions.
For the people who don't know.
That's a little bit different.
Also,
Sorry, I was chugging an Oreo. Because I'm saying maps are not the types of things that can be either true or false. But when someone someone denies climate change, they're saying we're not 100% justified to say that climate change is bad.
not only that, but just actually the models in terms of predictions.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe more than that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The model of climate change isn't. Oh, okay, so it's not
Like
like an exhaustive model. Yeah. So, but. Alright, so I guess it's the same thing, yeah, like the model isn't, so what the guy is saying, the climate denier, whoever, he's saying that it's not accurate enough for us to change our policies, right?
Yes, no longer is it, is carbon dioxide actually changing the weather. I think this person is much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, he's
More
just trying to attack
the models for predictions of how severe it is.
Yeah.
And of course,
It's
I
hard
guess,
to make models of climate change in the future.
but I guess it's again, if that's the case, then why do we have any justified beliefs in predicting economic models, etc.?
Yeah.
But that was when you said about math
Okay, right.
and etc. There are different degrees where, hey, your schematic of your map of the matrix is definitely you could say somewhere down the line you've just blasted something in the wall and it's not the map the schematic does not truly fit the schematic of the true state of the Wainsmith, but that doesn't necessarily say that all the other rooms are not adequately represented. Likewise, in a climate change climate model, it might say, hey, we have some degree of accuracy that this is going to happen here with this temperature, and sure, maybe in the future there's one portion in the Earth that is inadequately predicted, but other places it is represented. But still, it's like there's this thing where, I mean, that should be justifiable,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, but the question of justifiability is a little bit different. So if I say like this table is made out of wood, that's a proposition, like a sentence that can be either true or false.
Yes.
Right, so it happens to be true, this table is made out of wood. So it's not like, there's not like degrees of accuracy or inaccuracy with the sentence.
Yeah.
So propositions are the kind of, so it seems like what Alex has on this slide is that its beliefs are propositional attitudes that have to be strictly true or false. And I think that, I don't know, I've been thinking about
So
this
I think
lately,
at
maybe
least-
too stringent.
It maybe like at least if we're thinking about, I mean, if we're thinking about like beliefs about, I mean, so this is definitely like very, it's from the human context, like what's a belief? It's something I can call on, it's something I can be asked about, it's something I can like utter out loud to like members of my social group. But I do think there is, like you're saying, there's this other sort of, I mean, because like what we're talking about is like when we're using, or when we're uttering propositions, we're giving some like account of how the world is, or like how we believe the world is, and we're like representing that with the Speech Act. So I think there's like this, what you're talking about, like with rats and other, I mean, humans have this, right? We have like visual ways of representing the world around us, and like I can tell you where the exit is, even though I can't see it. And that's a sort of knowledge too, but it's still like at the fundamental level, the truth or falsity of it does have to do with whether or not that representation is right true. But there is this accuracy thing, I think, that comes up with different aspects. So like when we're talking about like facts, it is a little more cut and dried of like, is it true, is it false, is there this I'm not even gonna deal with the third truth condition because I don't want to. But then like sometimes we assess beliefs in terms of accuracy. Sometimes we do, and that's a different sort of thing. But that may be a way to expand on this idea of belief. Like this isn't, I'm not going for sufficient here. I'm going like, at least a belief is this thing,
Okay.
but there could be other beliefs.
But
or
definitely,
it's not a belief.
I'm very curious, where do models fit?
Yeah, word models.
Well, is it a belief? I don't think so, based on that proposition, because definitely when you're because propositions can be either true and false, there's no ambiguity, but is it then a justified true belief, or is
So
it
it depends on what you're using the model for. Like if you're using a model to like show a trend, so then what you're extracting from the model is the trend, and that trend can be true or false, right? So like let's say for instance we're talking about climate change,
Yes.
and we're looking at like the way sea levels are rising or
Yes.
temperature has changed over
Yes.
the last 50 years.
Yes.
There, you can take the data and extrapolate something from it and say, the climates are changing, sea levels are rising, and the Earth is becoming warmer. Those are propositions. There are facts of the matter in the world about that. So, with model and kind of like data, what you're looking at is you don't want to necessarily say something about like, oh, this is like entirely accurate, I think, but you do want to say, look, there's a trend we're noticing, and that trend is a proposition, right? That's something you have to.
So you can, so even though there's some claims which maybe
You can make
there are
claims about the model.
there are, you can then make propositions that, like, this model predicts that in 10 years, the temperature of the world will be above 0.5, like
Right.
that, and that can be
So you
true or
can,
false.
right, you can
That's the
extract,
proposition.
you
Yeah.
can extract a proposition from a model. But what I'm saying is like maybe some belief states, some mental states, because that's what you said a belief was, is a mental
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
Some mental states are map-like a rat knowing how to go through the maze to get the food.
But not propositions.
So, I mean, but it's not like in a sentence form, or it's.
You're
not a
right, they can't
proposition.
talk about it, so how is that, the thing is, and also this, an aside, like, are rats
So, but
conscious?
maybe you could extract a proposition from, if the rat could talk, it could say like, well, you take a left here and then a right and go straight,
Yeah.
and that's where you find the food.
Well, that's like, it's
So
like,
it's like
humans,
a-
like if you
there's
ask me
still
how
a-
to find
like
a
a
bathroom,
truth bearer.
I would tell you the same thing. We just have the ability to make speech acts.
But arguably our sort of like cognitive equipment is the same in terms of like map generating
So
and
maybe
like
they can generate,
spatial awareness as rats. We're all mammals, evolutionarily speaking.
so maybe they can give the maps to themselves, like in the sense that they can, I mean, so we're
They
not,
can just retrieve it from their memory.
yeah, so like they're in the thing, they're like, oh, I go left here, and then they go
So,
left here.
but that's what I'm saying, it's like maybe
So-
our own cognition works the same way, but we can just extract a proposition from a map. And the propositions can be true.
Well, we can communicate. I mean, that's a big thing, is like we have verbal capabilities.
Yeah.
And so, like, so it may be the case that like, in terms of consciousness, we're relatively similar, and there's just this extra piece that we can sit here. and-
Because like with your correspondence to your truth, there are truth bearers and truth makers. And that's
Yeah.
what, there's the correspondence is between the facts of the world, which are the
Yeah.
truth makers, that make some proposition true or belief true, and the truth bearer, which is like the belief that you have or the claim. So it's the relation between those that corresponds to, if there's that correspondence, then it's true. So there can be correspondence between a map and the territory,
Yeah.
the map and the world. So I guess it doesn't have to be, yeah.
Well, then there's like the knower, and that's what's interesting, is like, so there's like the rat, is like, if I go left here, I'll find food. And then, whether or not that's like, it's not a speech act, right, it's something that's telling itself. And then it goes to the lever and there's no food, it's gonna be like, oh, that's false. That proposition was false, what I told myself was not right.
Well, they're not gonna think that way, but they could maybe if they expressed it that way.
Yeah.
But we,
Yeah. So I guess I'm imagining like, oh, I go left here, I find food, that's a proposition, I'm representing some fact about the world as I take it, but I have some attitude toward it, and it turns out to be false, I'm like, no way, no. Move on. So that's what we mean by belief. I still don't know what a belief is. I'm not totally, I mean, like, no one can tell me what social attitude, but it looks like there could be other sorts of, I mean, I don't know how we would describe, if I had, let's say, like a mental state where I like represent this room in some way to myself, is it a belief about the room? Seems like it. And
Yeah.
it's like a representation of the room. It's a little, like beliefs are representations of.
Can beliefs be like almost like faith? Well,
Well, that's a question.
because my thought is like,
what do you mean?
because a lot of people when they talk about faith, well, faith is the principle that you don't have necessarily like a backing to it. You just believe it is true, like God or something.
But that's
You
not
have
a
faith-
justification.
No, but
The
like
belief-
it's
So belief is just thinking that something is the case.
Yeah.
Think about it like that. A belief is
Yeah,
just
yeah,
like
yeah.
and it's
It's
not
not
even
the case, yeah.
You just kind of like you have to be certain about it. You don't necessarily have to have justification. All that's separate.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can just think like, I think whatever. Like I'm just like inclined to have this belief. It's just thinking that something's the case.
yeah, which I was thinking.
You can think that there's a God and have no reason whatsoever to
And that's-
no
Yeah.
reason and
Yeah.
believe it by faith or whatever.
Yeah, so that's still belief.
Yeah, so I think we're used to talking in our kind of ordinary everyday interactions. Like if you say you believe something, people ask for justification or they ask for a reason why you think it's the case. But I mean that's probably a good practice. You should do that. But you don't have to. So beliefs aren't necessarily formed on the basis of reasons. It can be, but beliefs can also be kind of they just happen. You just believe things about the world without having
Yeah,
to
largely
that's what
intuition.
That's what they get the faith thing.
Yeah, so with the faith thing, I don't know, because I think that people when I hear someone say like, oh, I believe there's a God, I just take them to be saying that like they think that there is some fact in the world that there's a God, and they believe it. Right? They think that it's true that there's a God out there.
That's
That's all they're
separate
saying.
though from their justification for it.
Yeah.
So if we're just talking about beliefs, like this
Yeah.
ingredient that goes into knowledge, it's just thinking that something is true, or thinking it's
Like
like
the world is such that there is a God. And you can like think it that way. So it's like if I say, oh, I think there's a door behind
I
me,
see what
I
you
just think that the world is such that that is behind me.
Okay, I see what you mean. So I think like what we were saying before, faith assumes that the person thinks, like you're saying, that they think that there is a fact that justifies, and that has to be a fact. Where belief is just like,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
They could or cannot be.
So basically, beliefs, there's a superset of, belief, and then the justified beliefs
That's fair.
within that.
Oh, that's
and you
faith.
can have, and faith is, you could have that everything that's outside but still inside the belief superset is faith, but once you have justified,
Okay.
that's where
That makes
knowledge, science,
Right.
etc.
It helps to
That makes
think of concentric circles or circles within circles.
Yeah, I that makes a lot.
So the biggest circle is just thinking that there's some corresponding fact, and then you narrow it down into like the ones you have a justification for, and then you narrow it down even more the ones that are true that you have a justification for that you believe.
Mhm.
So belief is just like the biggest circle,
Real.
I think that's what.
and that's just all the things people think.
And there's also this like, if you wanted to do it, there's like justified beliefs and true beliefs, and those don't necessarily
Oh, yeah.
overlap in any way. So there's like a belief that could be true that you don't know is true, and there's like justified beliefs that
Oh,
are
yes.
true beliefs.
Based upon how, oh God, that's another question about how do we, like the outside of our perception, what is actually, true, back to the thing about, how do we know that there's outside of our visible universe, that there's something right out there that could be true, but we'll never actually know.
So we could talk about skepticism after we get through this stuff,
Yeah.
and like different kinds of skepticism.
Yes.
There's like local skepticism and global skepticism.
We need part 2. Just kidding.
There we could do part.
But it's a good skepticism is a whole thing in and of itself.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, this is why we keep it open-ended. Sometimes it just.
So I guess that goes to the justification part, is does
Yeah.
that require certainty, or does that require infallibility?
Oh my gosh, that depends.
And I think a lot of philosophers would say, what,
Well, yeah. Okay, so what makes a proposition true? Yeah. Oh, why is that orange? It's supposed to be red.
Red.
That's still like.
Yeah.
So
This still gives the urgency value.
this is a new thing we're doing where it's the assumption alert. So last time the assumptions were like built into the beginning of the discussion. This time we're not building them in until like later. So
Okay.
just disclaimer. We're assuming that the truth of a proposition depends upon its correspondence with the world or facts in the world. This is not, generally, this is the way that we think of truth, like at least in formal logic, most forms of epistemology that think, or they give like, what were you saying? There's other like senses of truth that we kind of have to talk about. So like,
yeah, this is just the common sense.
this is the
Yeah.
common sense version of truth. Right, so assuming that like truth is something that applies to facts or propositions, so what makes a particular claim true is like a truth maker like he was talking about. There's like the sentence that is either true or false, that's a bearer and then her, and so that relationship is what like gives us truth values. So that's what we're assuming what we mean by truth. Also, because we're talking about propositions. This is because propositions are claims about how the world is. So if you want to know if something's true or false, you probably should look at the thing it's talking about or describing. Pretty common sense. So we'll move on from truth. So let's consider an example. Proposition: the Earth orbits the Sun. What makes that true or false? The fact of the matter about the Earth's relation to the Sun. So A is true, just in case the Earth does in fact go around the Sun. It would be false if it did anything else, basically. So yeah, that's how that works. What makes a belief justified? So there's also the philosophical weeds ahead. Those are the weeds.
What?
So this is a big topic in philosophy. It actually probably like most of epistemology right now. A lot of people talk about justification.
Like after Gettier attacked the reductive or view of knowledge, people started coming up with other accounts of justification.
Yeah, he knows way more about this than I do. So this is where we can talk about internalist and externalist theories of justification.
Or like
Um,
evidentialism and non-evidentialism. That's like a better
Yeah.
distinction.
Yeah. So another assumption alert. So wow. So okay, for the sake of discussion, let's assume justification just depends on whether or not the belief is formed in the appropriate way.
Okay.
Which is a very Aristotelian thing to say, but basically, I'm gonna remain agnostic about what is the appropriate way beliefs should be formed. There are kind of a couple big divides here. So there's the externalist, internalist divide. So it's about, the internalists are more concerned with how it's a part of like your own cognitive processes, how the belief is formed. The externalists think it has more to do with like sort of the evidence, like things that are external to your conscious belief formation.
Like the causal
Yeah, the causal
connection
history.
to the world.
Which is probably, I tend to think that's probably more correct. Right, so the Slumdog Millionaire example, thank God we have an example. So when he asks how you know things, he gives like a causal history of how it is that he learned.
And so that's an external versus an internal knowledge, version of knowledge. For in an external case, he has knowledge, but in an internal case, he really doesn't. He really doesn't really know. Is that the
He
case?
is deriving himself. Not the
No,
internal.
that could fit with both internalism and external.
Really?
Because it's like having, the internal and external is like, like this Slumdog kid, he can like give an account. He can give the underlying logical connection of his justification. Like he can link the facts to his claim.
I see.
But think about like a dog who's being fed. They don't really know, they can't articulate or they can't even piece together in their mind the underlying logical connection. That connection is external to their mind. So it's just like the dog is in an environment where it hears like the sound of the food in the bowl, and that's enough to connect the dog to the states of affairs, to what he knows. But there's no knowing that he knows, or there's no like internal logic of it. That makes any sense.
It's not taken, I see. Yeah, it's not like a part of his,
But he still knows.
yeah, it's not something he takes into his, Well, because the idea was like, if you had, right, the knowing that you know is you can give an account of like the reasons upon like how to be called to do so, or like give it some thought, and so if you're from an external perspective, you'll never be able to do so. But presumably the external can't won't be worked that way, right? So
Yeah.
there are things that can affect the way like your beliefs are formed, and then that can be taken into like your conscious. Oh, I like the light.
I'm gonna put on the other side.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
I see
there-
what you're doing.
And then within
Isn't that
these
like evidentialist?
externalist, there's different theories of like how the justification works. It's like a matter of tracking truth, or it's a matter of like having a reliable causal connection, or it's a matter of proper functioning of your cognitive faculties or something like that.
I'm still confused about external versus internal. Can you go to a deep dive? Just a quick deep dive.
Yeah, so like, maybe this will help. So like in philosophy, there's like a difference between rationalists and empiricists. Like the rationalists, like Rene Descartes, when he's doing like he's trying to find some, he's trying to find some like a certain foundation, what he calls clear and distinct ideas, right? Like indubitable foundations of knowledge that he can't be wrong about, and then he builds like a logical connection from those foundational beliefs that he's certain about to like knowing some scientific truths, or that there's an external world, that God exists, whatever, other kinds of beliefs. So he basically, the internalist is like, in order to know that some more complex belief, some complex idea, you have to be able to like have this like internal understanding of the logical connection to like more certain foundational truths. And if you can sort of piece that together in your mind, if you're aware of that underlying logical connection, then you can know it. Then you're justified. So the justification is internal to the agent.
Could I could an example be like in mathematics where understanding mathematical kind of like, theory of relativity, like how Einstein got relativity, you had a basis in some kind of internal, your belief on some mathematics, and then he over and over until you get the justified belief for the theory of relativity, even though, or would you still think that's empiricism because you got
Well, I don't know the steps Einstein took to come up with general relativity. Just use a more simple
okay.
case.
I would not know what this is.
Like just have a basic knowledge. I don't know. Like this table is made out of wood or something. I mean, you don't have to like.
What is
It's-
basic knowledge?
I don't know. Just not basic, like simple. I mean, not like some
Okay.
complex theory, but
Okay, yeah.
some more simple. Well, so there's different ways that we can know things, right? We can know things. We can gain information through perception, through memory, right? You can remember something, and then that's how you can know it. Through testimony, someone can tell you, and you can be like, how do you know that? Well, this person told me.
Okay.
And you can actually know something through testimony.
Okay.
Or through introspection, right? Like you can, I'm really in pain right now, and you can know that because you're introspecting on your own mental states. Or like through rational insight, like a triangle has 3 sides or something, or geometric knowledge, mathematical knowledge, stuff like that. So there's different ways of like knowing things, and like, I mean, the internals and externals have different things to say about it, but just a real straightforward distinction between internalism and externalism is like how the justification for the belief works, like how that comes about. Is it like a matter of like the internal states that a person has access to with internalism, or does a person not necessarily have to have access to it? They're just like they just have this like connection and it's the external connection from their mind that makes the knowledge reliably produced. So if like some belief is reliably produced in a person or an animal or something, then they can know it, but they don't necessarily have like the internal sort of account of the logic of what they're believing, but they can still know it. Right? Like, a rat can know how to get through a maze, a dog can know when it's going to be fed,
Oh, okay, so
It's a matter of the external environmental conditions that they're in that allow for them to like have a justification for their belief.
wait, isn't there a difference between, when the ancients believed how harvest, depending on how the sun goes around the earth, even though they did not know, they do know that there is some connection between the sun and the crops, but they really didn't know the exact kind, it's the environment.
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, we have a justified belief that it's because the earth goes around the sun, there's these different.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, it doesn't really go case by case. It's more like different philosophers hold to internalism over externalism or vice versa. So the internals to the externals will give you a different sort of story of how justification works. So that's what they're really, that's the difference, what they're sort of talking about.
Yeah.
So,
I'm still confused, but.
so Matt has a comment. He's saying there might be an intermediate sort of knowledge, like knowing that it works. Like you teach a kid the quadratic formula, they know it gives them the relationship between the sides of a right angle, but they don't understand the proof behind it. So he thinks a dog knowing that it'll get fed will probably fall under that kind of.
So there's a distinction that Bertrand Russell made, and it's the distinction between knowing that and knowing how.
Yeah.
So like I know that a bike has 2 wheels, a bicycle has 2 wheels. That's true by definition.
Yeah.
That's more of like a
I
knowledge of
also
what.
know.
There's like a familiarity, knowledge what.
Yeah, but there's also like
And
I
then-
know how to ride a bike, and that's a very different thing than saying.
That's like procedural knowledge. Like I know how to pedal and ride a bike.
Yeah.
But that's not like propositional knowledge that. I know that a bike is made of aluminum and rubber or
because
whatever.
because it's back to that kind of thing where a belief is a proposition that it's a yes or it's a true or false, whereas knowing how to ride a bike
Just familiarity.
is
procedural knowledge.
oh yeah.
But what the commenter was saying is that maybe there are kinds of knowledge like these externalist accounts of justification where you can have knowledge that, the dog knows that it's about to be fed. If the dog could speak, it could articulate what it's believing in terms of a proposition that could be true. But it's just like, the reason that the dog is justified to believe it is because of the sounds that it hears, and that it's reliably connected to me actually feeding it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the environmental conditions are what provide the justification, not the access that the dog has to logic and reason.
Oh yeah, okay, now I see a little bit, I think I'm seeing that internalism versus externalism where, the dog doesn't really can make logical kind of associations, but
Like, that's not what justifies the dog knowing he's about to be fed. It's not like the access to to what's happening in the world in terms of like connecting A to B to C to D and being able to like explain that or think about it.
So the dog, okay, so I see.
The dog is just reacting to some
External stimulus.
some
So
perceptions.
basically, if A, B, C, D, then he knows he's gonna be fed, but he doesn't know that, A tends to, A plus B, B plus C, and therefore,
He's just hearing it, but he's hearing the external side of it.
at the moment.
And that's what justifies his.
Yeah, so he's saying
Oh.
it's a statistical knowledge rather than a theoretical knowledge.
Yeah, like statistical objective probability kind of thing. Statistical. Is that all you're
I think so. Yeah, that's all you're right. But yeah, like
Sort of, yeah. Right, that's basically right.
yeah, but
Yeah.
probabilistic values and such.
I mean, it's not really that important that we
Okay,
go too deep into internalism and external.
okay, yeah,
It's just-
I just wanted to know.
I think
so-
that evidentialism is much more interesting.
So what is that then?
Well, so you'll hear people say, I guess evidentialism has enough to do with belief too. So like,
And the justification for a belief.
yeah. So like, you'll say like, well, why should I? So one of the comments that people say is like, well, I should believe what I have the most evidence for, and when in reality you should probably believe what's actually the case. And so you have to introduce an extra step into saying like what you have evidence for was actually the case or somehow the same. Like Portmore makes this distinction a lot, and that's really, it's a kind of problem in one of his views. So like this comes up actually, not as important. Maybe it is. So it comes up with like rational choice and some other. It comes up a lot in like ethics about like promising and sort of some contexts is like, well, it seems like what you should believe. In some contexts, like keeping promises is what you have like evidence for, but at the same time, it's like, well, no, maybe what I should actually promise is what's true or what will be the case, and you have problems with that. So a lot of people will say like, well, you should believe what you have most evidence for. So like if I get on, so like let's say my brother is not, he's a nervous flyer, and like whenever we're landing in an airplane, he's like freaking out. He's like, oh my god, it's like the plane's going down, and like I would tell him like, no, you probably shouldn't believe that this plane's gonna crash. Like it's not. That doesn't seem reasonable. Or the evidence is that this plane is not gonna crash. Most planes don't crash. You're on a plane, you're probably gonna be fine. And that's what like you have evidence for. So you should like consider. It's not really so much probability, but
Yeah, so like, just to put it simply, the evidentialist theories of justification or of knowledge think that you should believe based on the evidence that's available, right? And then the non-evidentialist doesn't disregard evidence, but they think that there's more to the story, and that like you can know something when it's basically you're caused to believe it by the facts.
Yeah.
And how that causal connection happens, they debate. But it's like, so it's not a matter of you like being aware, like having access to the evidence, like an internalist. The non-evidentialist tends to be the externalist, who is just like, there's got to be some environmental conditions that are met, and when you're in the right environmental, context, that's how you're sort of caused to know something in a reliable way. And it's not a matter of like following the evidence really, it's like being either tracking the truth or being caused by the facts to believe it, or having your cognitive faculties functioning in the right way or something like that.
Yeah.
That's good enough.
Yeah, they can definitely, it gets tricky real quick, and that's why there's philosophical weeds, is because honestly, we could talk about like what justifies belief.
But there are counterexamples to like every single theory.
Yeah.
So the evidentialist is just straight up facing Getty or counterexamples, like, well, you have like the broken clock. I have evidence, right? I'm following the evidence. I have a belief that's true, except I don't, intuitively it doesn't seem like I know it. So the evidentialist is like, they just have to bite the bullet when it comes to Getty.
Yeah.
But then these other non-evidentialist theories or externalist theories, they also have counterexamples of, if you want to say, well, it's when a belief is reliably produced. Well, you can come up with a counterexample where some facts are reliably produced in you, but you wouldn't say that you know it. So there's all kind, and then same with tracking the truth or, cause to believe something in the right kind of way. So there's no account where there's no like reductive account that is completely immune to all logically possible counterexamples.
Give me Getty's examples.
Yeah, so
Let's go there now.
I think we're there. Oh yeah, so we are kind of there. Yeah, okay, here we go. So to summarize all of that, so if S has a justified true belief that P, what we mean is S has a propositional attitude, at least that P is true. We're assuming we're talking about humans, and it's like sort of the same. And then P is, and we're talking about like propositions, like specifically things that can be uttered. That P is true, and S form the propositional attitude that P is true in the appropriate way. So basically, we just kind of like took all the things when we define those three terms and put them in there. So if A through C are true, it seems like S knows that P. That is at least the assertion. If knowledge is the same as justified true belief. So then Gettier happens. The criteria for knowledge is justified true belief. I don't think so. Remember that outfit makes him look like a Tibetan monk? Like
Yeah,
color
that's what
scheme?
yeah, with it, like kind of like an airbender.
Is that a medal that he's wearing?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just like an undershirt or something.
No, look
That's
at the
a very-
lanyard. Looks like a lanyard.
Maybe it's a lanyard.
That's
It's weird. Is like why would he touch the shirt? Maybe the.
That
That's
can also be modest.
This is I published one paper. That's yeah. It's like some super. It's like the. Like it could be like a Diogenes medal or something. Like
Kind of
totally
like an
that's
air
philosophy. Okay, yeah. So Gettier's counterexamples. Recall from earlier. If knowledge is justified true belief, then it follows that a belief must be justified and true. Count of knowledge. There is no instance of knowledge that is not a justified true belief, and there is no instance of justified true belief that is not knowledge. Gettier denies 3. So he thinks that there is some instance of justified true belief that is not knowledge. So kind of his outline for his argument is basically, all right, fine. If knowledge is justified true belief, then it seems like all of these things follow, but if I can give an example of there being justified true belief that's not knowledge, then it would follow that the definition is just wrong, right? Because definitions they're actually incredibly restrictive in one sense, is because they commit you to these like 3 conditions, and if you can just like prove one wrong, then you're fine. Like because you could probably say that there is, 1 and 2 are pretty good, and so it seems like if you're gonna go for 1, and then I think in all the examples we gave earlier, we did this where there's like if you have the clock on the wall, it's like you have a justified true belief that you know the time, but it's not knowledge because what you don't know is that the clock is broken. And then maybe if you knew the clock was broken, you wouldn't say you knew it, or knowledge wouldn't be attributed to you, but such is life. Okay, so Gettier argues that justified true belief is not sufficient for knowledge because there are instances of justified true belief that are not knowledge is not knowledge. If that is true, then justified true belief would not be a sufficient condition for knowledge, because there would be cases where There is just by true belief, not knowledge. Case 1. Okay, so, cut off a little bit. So, suppose that Smith and Jones have applied for a certain job, and suppose that Smith has strong evidence for the following conjunctive proposition. Jones is the man who will get the job, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Smith's evidence for D might be that the president of the company assured him that Jones would in the end be selected, and that he, Smith, had counted the coins in Jones's pocket 10 minutes ago, for some reason. Proposition D entails the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. So he's waiting for an interview. He knows that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket because he counted them. And he's talked to the president of the company and said, we're going to offer Jones the job. He's going to get hired. So from that, it follows that the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, Jones being the man who he believes will get the job, and Jones being the man who has 10 coins in his pocket. Let us suppose that Smith sees the entailment from D to E and accepts D on the grounds of D, for which he has strong evidence. In this case, Smith is clearly justified in believing that E is true. But imagine further that unknown to Smith, he himself, not Jones, will get the job. And also unknown to Smith, he himself has 10 coins in his pocket. Proposition E is then true, though proposition D, from which Smith inferred E, is false. In our example then, all of the following are true. E is true, Smith believes that E is true, and 3, Smith is justified in believing that E is true. But it is equally clear that Smith does not know that E is true, for E is true in virtue of the number of coins in Smith's pocket, while Smith does not know how many coins are in Smith's pocket and bases his belief in E on account of the coins in Jones' pocket, whom he falsely believes to be the man who will get the job. Clear as mud? I mean, you get like the basic kind
It's
of.
kind of just like a special story of like,
Yeah.
oh, well, here's a case. where-
Special story is a good way to describe it.
It's a convoluted story, but it's like, oh, you got all the 3 things before
Yeah.
you justified belief, but then Smith just doesn't know that he had the 10 coins in the first place, so he could not,
Or that he was getting the job.
yeah.
So we'll come back,
Yeah, he goes from D to E.
which is fine.
Yeah.
Totally fine. So we'll come back to this. So is it a good counterexample? So a little bit about this. So you can say like, all right, Gettier, I see what you tried to do there. Nice attempt at a counterexample, but it's a bad counterexample, and then you could give a reason why it's a bad counterexample. So, right, if it's a good counterexample, then you have to like bite the bullet and just go like, yeah, man, JTB is not knowledge, fine, like good on you. Or you can like come up with some reason why it's not an instance of a justified true belief, and you can like give some reason for it. Those are kind of your only 2 options.
Well, the first one, you don't have to go that far to say JTB isn't knowledge, because clearly lots and
here's
lots
an
of
example.
cases of justified true belief are knowledge.
Yeah, lots.
You would just have to say that it's not an exhaustive account.
Yeah.
Alright.
Well, for what
That's
Gettier's
pretty important.
You're like, oh yeah, there's an
So
example. That's not
JCB is
knowledge.
necessary but not sufficient.
So you,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
that's what you said.
I'm okay with that.
So does Smith have a
Yeah.
justified true
Sure.
belief that the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket or not? So that's like E. So, yeah. And then why or why not? So we'll go back to the case. And we can go back and forth from here. So, I think that he doesn't have a justified true belief.
Wait.
So I don't think it's a good. Wait,
Why? But it follows from D. It's like it deductively follows from D.
Yeah, so
But
my
there-
problem is, yeah, so I have a linguistic, I guess, a language problem with this. So his proposition, and this is kind of what I was talking to you about earlier. So when he says, the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket,
Yeah.
his referent of the man who will get the job, or actually the man, so if you like take that sentence and you actually like take it out to what it's like saying is, the man who will get the job is the same as the man that has 10 coins in his pocket. But since he doesn't know, so for Smith, the referent of the man who has 10 coins in his pocket is Jones. And so the problem is if you take those referents and like leave them in the sentence as constructed, it says Smith is the same man as Jones, which they're not, and it's false.
No,
And that's a problem for me.
No, it's because you're deducing from D to E, and
No,
D
that's
is
fine.
well, the D is a conjunction of two claims. One, Jones is the man who will get the job,
And Jones has 10
and then
coins.
second, Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. And from D, you can deduce that whoever will get the job has 10 coins. And the man is not, it doesn't have to reference, anything, it's a variable. It can be a completely empty variable. It can say just X. The X factor, the X person that will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. You don't have to be referring to anybody. Because it's logically deduced from D. It's like entailed by D.
Yeah.
So you're still stuck on D, but you can't give that objection to E.
So I think my problem is then, so I guess to clarify, so there is like the proposition as, like, we would read it, and there's the proposition as Smith is like giving it, so like, there's essentially two different beliefs, and they're not equivalent.
But
So-
no, you're wrong about that, because E has a variable. The variable doesn't have to be filled with any reference.
No,
It's just
Well,
the
so-
man, any man,
no,
any
no, but
person
like-
who gets the job is
I'm
gonna have
imagining
10
from
coins.
like the semantic approach, it's like, so if I'm imagining like, if we're like trying to interpret the meaning of E, you have to like give the referent of the thing it's referring to. And
No,
in
no,
fact, you
no,
get
you don't.
two sentences that are not
No, you
equivalent,
don't.
and that's the
E
problem.
is a true proposition. Because, that's true. The man, the woman, the child, who
No,
will
it's
get the
true,
job.
it's,
The
it's
person who
true
will
in
get
one
the
sense
job.
and false in a different one, and that's the.
How is the sentence, the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket? How is that,
So
in
it's
what
the man-
sense is that false?
So the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. So when Smith has that belief, he's imagining Jones.
Can you lower the contrast?
So he's like
No,
Jones.
he doesn't have to. He
What's,
doesn't have to.
what's the meaning of the man who will get the job?
That's not the focus.
Okay.
It's the 10 coins that's the focus. It's like the person who gets this job will have 10 coins in their pocket.
No, the man.
That's what makes it. The man.
No, but it's not that will have 10 coins. They have 10 coins, and so that person that will get the job.
Yeah, they have 10
Has
coins
10
in their
coins.
pocket. But that's like the sort of focus of the. That's the important part. It's the man is not. You know, like. Smith doesn't have to be thinking, or Jones doesn't have to be thinking. Wait, it's Smith. Smith doesn't have to be thinking about any man in particular for that to be true. It's just the man. Whoever it is.
Yeah, but the man is referring to Jones, which in that case
No,
the sentence is
no,
false.
it doesn't. No, it doesn't have to. It's just it can be a variable.
We have a comment from Matt who has his thoughts. So he says that it is a valid example, but kind of ignores the way that we normally form knowledge. So he says Smith believes that Jones will get the job, and that Jones has 10 coins, and therefore believes that the man with 10 coins will get the job.
Yeah. It's the 10 coins that matters.
But his beliefs is more realistically that Jones will get the job, as that is the information he was given
Yeah.
and the basis of his belief.
Yeah, that's the meaning of the sentence. So there's two E's, and they're not equivalent. That's all I'm saying. Is that there is E as like basically the proposition that Smith believes, and then there is like the E that is the proposition about like the facts of the world from like a third person perspective. And so, because like he doesn't know that he has the 10 coins in his pocket, so it's like E that refers to Jones, and then E that refers to Smith, and they're different. So they're not semantically equivalent, and that's where I like walk out, which is like too much philosophy of language. I mean, I see what he's trying to do, and I think case 2 is probably stronger than case 1 personally.
Case two.
So I just think it's not an example of justified true belief because the propositions that are supposed to be identical are not.
So Spencer, do you
Under
think
the, like,
it's a valid counterexample?
I mean, maybe there are objections. The thing is, these counterexamples are endless. You can come up with, we can come up with a better one that doesn't have that ambiguity. Right, it's not hard to come up with an example of someone who has a justified true belief that's not known. It's easy to come by. So, I mean, I think it is. I guess it could be talked out of it, but let's go to the second one.
Okay. Don't love that. Case 2. So this one's a bit stranger, more strange. So let us suppose that Smith has strong evidence for the following proposition. always with the evidence. Jones owns a Ford. Smith's evidence might be that Jones has at all times in the past within Smith's memory owned a car and always a Ford, and that Jones has just offered Smith a ride while driving a Ford. Let us imagine now that Smith has another friend, Brown, of whose whereabouts he is totally ignorant. Smith selects 3 place names quite at random and constructs the following 3 propositions. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Boston. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in that one. Each of these propositions is entailed by F. Imagine that Smith realizes the entailment of each of the propositions he has constructed by F and proceeds to accept G, H, and I on the basis of F. Everyone knows how OR statements work, so as long as like one part of it is true, the whole thing. Yeah, I feel it. Smith has strong evidence. Smith has correctly inferred G, H, and I from the proposition for which he has strong evidence. Smith is therefore completely justified in believing each of these 3 propositions. Smith, of course, has no idea where Brown is, but imagine now that 2 further conditions hold. First, Jones does not own a Ford, but is at present driving a rented car. And secondly, by the sheerest coincidence and entirely unknown to Smith, the place mentioned in Proposition H happens really to be the place where Brown is. If these 2 conditions hold, then Smith does not know that H is true, even though H is true, and Smith does believe that H is true, and Smith is justified in believing that H is true. These 2 examples show that the definition A does not state, and he's referring back to earlier with the 3 conditions. The definition A does not state a sufficient condition for someone's knowing a given proposition. In the same cases, with appropriate changes will suffice to show that neither definition B nor C do so either. We didn't talk about those, but it's basically Ayer and his teacher, they gave their own versions of JTB. So is it a good counterexample? Does Smith have a justified true belief that Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Boston or not? Why or why not? This one's a bit weird. So basically,
Well, in the past, Jones had always owned a Ford,
so he seems justified in accepting that.
and he's offered Smith a ride while driving a Ford.
Yep.
So because they're disjuncts, because there's an or, only one, so it's either Jones owns a Ford or, so he's justified to believe G, H, and I. Because, right, he's got justification.
And evidence for the fact that Jones owns a Ford.
Uh,
I mean, because he could have said, like, Jones owns a Ford or is on the moon, and that statement would have been true, assuming that, Jones had a Ford, even though the second half is very unlikely. 1964. But,
So you can correctly infer these 3, G, H, and I. So he's justified. So he's not like moving through a false, like the first example, he's sort of moving through like a false proposition. This one isn't.
yeah. Although it kind of is, though, because it turns out Jones, right, so he believes that Jones owns a Ford. So that's like the false proposition he's moving through, right? So, but then it turns out that the states of the world are such that Brown is in Boston when he has that belief. Although that's kind of weird to me because, like, so it's true at the time that he forms that belief, but then this presumably once Brown leaves Boston, it becomes false. I guess there's nothing wrong with that.
I like the example of the clock because it does the clock really does because ultimately this is basically saying of just coincidences about the fact that Smith just makes a statement that is in the world true, but then in reality he just did not really know that Brown was in, I think since H, was in Barcelona. Just like in the clock example, like you know that the time is correctly stated at that time, but you don't know that actually the clock was just broken.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the clock example is much more clearer because it's just coincidences, and You just didn't know the internal workings of the clock to say, oh yeah, that clock is totally wrong.
I mean, I guess it'd be kind of interesting if you asked, like hypothetically, let's imagine asking Smith, like in this example, like we know where Brown is, he doesn't. And he knows all about logic, and he knows about like how this sort of thing works. And we ask him, oh, do you know G, H, and I, assuming that a justified true belief is knowledge. And then we told him, oh, Jones doesn't own a Ford, like what he would say, like, oh, I don't know those at all. Like, it turns out I don't know G, H, or I. But then it's like, well, but it turns out Brown's in Barcelona. So I guess you knew that after all. And he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But that seems to be the common sense answer to me, right? Like,
And he would say that he knows that Jones owns a Ford, because Jones has owned a Ford the whole time in the
no,
past.
if you told him like he doesn't own a Ford right now, that was a rental.
Oh, you'd have to tell him. Well, then
Yeah,
you're-
so
but
that's
then
what it
you're
says. You sit him down, it's like, so your friend Jones owns a Ford. He goes, yeah, I know he does, and he gave kind of this account. And then and then you're like, okay, so
Those are rental?
like, so G, H, and I, you know all of those. He's like, yeah, it's an understatement. And you're like, well, Jones doesn't own a Ford. He's like, oh, it turns out I didn't know any of those after all. And you're like, well, Brown's in Barcelona. He's like, cool, I didn't know that. And then it'd be like, well, okay, then H is gone, right? Like that. That's one of the things that always bugged me about this case is like, well, so like the justification he would cite for why he knows H is the thing that's false, but the fact that he's unaware of is the thing that makes it true. And so that causes problems for me.
That's why it's a counterexample.
But that's why it's a counterexample.
Sarah made a comment saying, if I'm correct with my logic, then the statement suggests that Jones not owning a Ford implies that Brown is in X location, or that Brown being in X location is conditional to Jones owning a Ford, which does not seem to be logically related to one another.
Yeah, I don't think they have to be logically related.
In order to be
It's
able-
just a coincidence that happened.
Yeah, more statement.
Given Smith's evidence, there are just these coincidences. This is just a case of, if this coincidence were to happen, then
It would know H.
Smith would have a justified true belief that isn't known.
Would it be the same, so would it be the same that you just say either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is not in the location where, that Smith is currently?
But it said, but then you're changing the sort of the case. It says, by the sheerest coincidence and entirely unknown to Smith, the place mentioned in Proposition H happens really to be the place where Brown is. So without changing it, is it a counterexample? Seems like, yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah, so is he justified in that belief? Well, yeah, it seems like he has justification.
I mean, if that, and
does
that's,
he believe it?
that's
Yeah.
one way you could object, is to be like, well,
Is it true?
you can't have any false background beliefs that help the justification. So anything that you're really justified to believe, it can't be sort of propped up by these false beliefs here and there. So all of your beliefs have to be true, but then you're taking justification down this path where you have to be. It's way too stringent of a criteria for justification.
But that seems right in the case of H though, right? Because you say, like, well, what's your justification for believing H? And he says, well, I know that Jones owns a Ford. Well, I guess he's right, yeah. He's like, I have really good evidence that Jones owns a Ford. And then you say, well, what if we told you he doesn't own a Ford? Would you still think that you know H? You'd probably say no.
But then,
I mean, there's this thing of like, it seems like that's right, that your justification can't depend on a false, a false proposition.
but then Smith
I mean,
still
certainly
doesn't
the-
know H because he doesn't believe anything about.
Brown being in Barcelona. Yeah. So you might believe H, he
So-
just doesn't believe the second half of H. So it's like you have to believe.
So the hard part of
or
analyzing is
statements
you have to
or-
keep the ideas of belief and truth and justification all in your mind at the same time. So like, you try to change it a little bit, but then he doesn't believe it. So then it's not then it's not knowledge, it's not a counterexample to knowledge.
So Sarah says, so it seems like a poor counterexample to rely on coincidental knowledge, but then again, I guess that's John's early example of society understanding harvesting seasons is an example of coincidental knowledge.
Well, it's not that it's the coincidence that's really the problem. It's that Jones has a justification, or Smith has a justification, right? Like when you look at the broken clock, it's the easiest example to think about. You look at it, you have a reason to say like, oh, it's whatever 5:30, and it's true that it's 5:30, and you believe it, but you don't. If it happens to be a coincidence, you can't really object and be like, well, that's just a coincidence. It was like, yeah, exactly, it was a coincidence, and your definition of knowledge is wrong.
It's like just like true belief and not a coincidence, and then you
Yeah,
add
right.
an extra condition. It's like,
Yeah.
well,
The non-coincidence theory of knowledge.
So my question then becomes like, is any justified belief that we have basically, knowledge at this point? We could just say.
Yeah, lots of our
yeah,
beliefs are
2 plus-
justified.
2 plus 2 equals 4.
Like this table's made
That's
of
a
wood.
justified true belief.
That's a justified true belief. So the point is not that
This
justified.
table's made of wood.
The point isn't that justified true belief is not at all ever knowledge. It's that it's not exhaustive. That there's like a bubble of beliefs that are justified and true, and you believe them. But there's some things that are knowledge that fall outside of those still.
Yeah.
Or they don't include, right? You know what I mean? That it's non-exhaustive.
So it's that like idea of extension. So like, if you take
Okay.
a
okay.
definition and like let's take a blanket and capture everything. There's just gonna be stuff that's outside the blanket.
The point is that this philosophical approach of analyzing knowledge by breaking it apart into these different pieces and trying to like come up with the ingredients, the necessary and sufficient conditions, you're
Not
doing it backwards.
Yeah,
you
not
don't a priori come up with a definition of knowledge and then apply it to everything in the world. That's the backwards way of doing it. The right way to do it is to go out and look at an instance of knowledge and be like, what is this person doing? How does it hold? And then you just go from there, and it's a posteriori.
It reminds me that kind of way of thinking reminds me of the kind of thing with justice theory where you can't say this is justice.
Right.
You just look at different examples and just say this is not justice, this is not justice, and so you don't say this is the core rule of justice. We don't really know. You just say not.
Reductive approaches do so.
It's sort of
The
helpful.
philosophy of language, usually like the way it turns is, are we talking about like a precise concept? And generally like when we think of precise concepts, we're imagining where intension and extension match. So like if you ask me the definition of a triangle, everything that I extend from the definition of a triangle is going to be captured, right? So 3-sided figure where all the interior angles add up to 280 degrees, right?
Yeah.
Or 360.
That's right.
Yeah.
360 degrees.
When you take that definition and you extend it, everything that's captured is a triangle. There's nothing out, there's nothing that's captured that's not a triangle.
180 degrees.
180.
180 degrees.
Not 360. Yeah, it's 180.
A square would be
360.
360.
Yeah.
A triangle
So,
would be 180.
but like, so triangle is a precise mathematical concept. So mathematical concepts, we get it. Logical concepts, we get it. Anything that's a priori, chances are we can
But
reduce.
knowledge,
Anything that's imprecise.
knowledge
like
isn't a priority.
Knowledge, justice. Yeah. No, it's not. It's like
Definitely some things
a
like that.
priori concepts, all for it. A posteriori, you start getting a lot of.
Into trouble.
Yeah, so that's like kind of the final thing to
Where
talk
did we go
about.
wrong?
So one more is that defining knowledge is too reductive. Attempting to reduce imprecise terms, knowledge to a set of necessary sufficient conditions. We end
So-
up missing something when we turn around and apply those conditions back to the world. Because that's like always the problem, right? Is you take it and then you have to throw it back out into the world and.
Have you read Linda Zagzebski's article on reductive analyses of knowledge? So she basically,
in the page.
yes, we should have linked to this. Linda Zagzebski's a famous philosopher who wrote on basically this whole thing about this reductive approach. And she said that any reductive approach that you take, where you try to break it into these ingredients with justification and belief and truth, they're either going to be circular in their definition, or there's going to be a counterexample. Or no, they'll be circular, or they'll be redundant, or there'll be a counterexample. So some people like an example of like a circular one is where it's like, it's knowledge equals justified and a true belief that's known. It's like, well, you're just defining knowledge in terms of what's known. That's circular, right? Or it can be redundant, and you can say knowledge is justified, true, or no, it's knowledge is like a belief that is justified and it's true, and it's also true. Like the justification entails truth. That's what I mean to say, right? So the ingredients are like belief, truth, and justification that's true. So it's redundant because you're adding truth twice. That's a way to get around counterexamples, is to be like, well, the justification can only be things that are true, but then it's like your analysis of knowledge has this like redundant feature.
Well, that's how you get to like the infallibles that are like, it's so if you're saying like all we have is like mathematical knowledge or like a priori knowledge, that's basically you're getting the same thing. The justification would entail truth in those cases.
But it doesn't.
Right,
You don't have to
it's
add
like-
it into the definition though. The infallible, it's different though. Yeah, you can just say it has to be like it has to be indubitable or something. Like the justification has to be.
Well, that's what you'd say. Is what makes it like
Yeah, I get it.
what makes it the case is like, well, it couldn't be otherwise. Well, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
You can't, but you can't add truth twice to one side of this
Yeah.
sort of equation. Otherwise, it's redundant. So otherwise, there's going to be counterexamples. You're always going to find some sort of a counterexample. So the solution, instead of doing this reductive analysis, is to
not.
to go out and look in the world and take this sort of more empirical approach to knowledge and look at the function of knowledge. Like our professor Stephen Reynolds at ASU, he takes a knowledge first approach to epistemology instead of belief first approach. So the belief first approach thinks that believing is like the basic mental state, and then you can add truth and justification things to it to turn it into something greater. But Reynolds thinks that's wrong. He takes the knowledge first approach to epistemology, and that's thinking that knowing is a basic mental state, and you can't break it down into further parts. It's just a factive mental state when you're like you're in a state of knowing, and it's like sort of unanalyzable a priori below like a certain point. It's kind of a non-reductive sort of view of knowledge, I guess. You can't break it down into other pieces. And he also takes a function first approach where he's kind of like, Reynolds is interested in the function of our concept of knowledge. So like what does our evaluative language do? What is the function of our evaluative language? When we say someone's being reasonable, or someone's being irrational, or someone's being stupid, or somebody knows something, that's like evaluative language in terms of epistemology. And he wants to look at like, what is the function of those, and like how, and he gives an account of like the origins of how that can come to be in terms of like our conceptual understanding. Yeah. Like if you take, he takes in a thought experiment from, it goes back to like, well, Edward Craig is a philosopher who wrote Knowledge in the State of Nature, but like Hobbes, I think, has this thought experiment, like John Locke uses it with like a thought experiment of like a state of nature, where you basically take like, Hobbes did it with government. So imagine a society that's exactly like ours, except you remove government. You remove like the institution of government. Like what would change? And when you find out what would change, then you have identified the function of government, right? So then Reynolds takes like or Edward Craig and Reynolds follows takes the same idea of a state of nature, but you remove the concept of knowledge, the concept of knowing. Like I can point to someone and say, you're a knower, I know something, right? It's a concept that functions in this way. But if you were to remove that, what would you be left with? And that sort of tells you about the function of how we use that language and how the concept can originate.
You can imagine that too, though. What would it be like without that concept?
Reynolds has a book called Knowledge as Acceptable Testimony.
Yeah.
And he breaks it down into having basically having knowledge, like the origins of the concept of knowledge comes down to reliable testimony. So if you imagine like some hominids or some early proto-humans who had language and had a concept of truth, they would want to have a concept that could flag reliable testifiers. So if you ask somebody like, hey, is there, you know, is the coast clear? Are there any dangerous predators, or where's the, you know, where's the water source, or where's their food, or something like that? You know, things that hunter-gatherers would talk about. They would want a concept that could flag or like identify people who could reliably testify. Like, yeah, there's water over there. If someone's like telling you, like, yeah, over that hill, way over there, there's like a good water source. You go over there, there's no water. You're gonna come back and be like, dude, you didn't.
No.
Yeah, but they didn't have that concept yet, so they like would. They came up with like. It basically came out of people being reliable testifiers. That's how we got the concept of knowledge in the first place.
But that's the question. People reliable testifiers.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. They're not all the
they're not
time.
exactly.
But when they are, it's helpful, and that can allow for a concept to basically catch on, and like now we have this concept of knowledge that we use all the time. But
You
that's
can
sort of,
content.
that's sort of Reynolds' like genealogical account of the concept of knowledge. And he thinks testimony plays a big part in sort of the development of how the concept has been grown and like been applied in our evolutionary past. But he takes like a function first approach. So he's like looking at the function of, like, he thinks this sort of a priori reductive analysis is just like it's a philosophical chimera. Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
It's like a smokescreen, like a sort of illusion. Like we can reductively analyze knowledge. No, yeah. So and then there are other philosophers that are into like virtue epistemology. That's like instead of being like you know, having some like being a reliabilist or an evidentialist or something like that, where you're like committed to this reductive view of virtue epistemologist is like it's kind of like virtue ethics, where it's a, you know, in virtue ethics, like Aristotle, someone they have like a disposition to act good or to be a good person.
Yeah.
So they sort of developed like the characteristics of a person, and they, you know, occupy this middle ground between vices, where they've found virtue, and they use it in different contexts. But the virtuous person doesn't do good things because they're good. How does it go? They're not good because they're virtuous. They're virtuous because they're good. So it's like you sort of live into being a virtuous person. So in virtue epistemology, it's the same. It's like you just develop habits of mind that are knowledge conducive or something. Like you weigh evidence, you question your beliefs, you're skeptical, you know, you apply, you know, rigorous procedures of finding out knowledge.
But the thing is, not that much people would do that.
Yeah, totally. You're right. That's true.
Well, so then
There's a point in virtue ethics that's often brought up. So people will say like, well, if what Aristotle was talking about is like actually how you should live, then it seems like, well, we're not going to have that many virtuous people. And a lot of people would say, I would think, and I'd probably agree with them, that like, yeah, virtue doesn't have to be common. Like, it's actually can be a very rare thing. And I think like a lot of virtue ethicists would say that like part of being like pursuing the good is having all those things built in to like, because like virtue ethics is a very like comprehensive like view of how you should live, and it includes like all these things about like don't tell me what knowledge is, like tell me how to have it, tell me how to get it. And so they would say like, well, it's not just about like you should like consider evidence, you should, you know, take testimony, you should take like all the possible routes possible, and then depending on what you're trying to know or find out, then you act appropriately at the appropriate time, the appropriate way, to the appropriate degree. That's what you do.
It's like what would a scientist do, or what would a philosopher do if they, you know, heard this claim, or if someone asks a question like, what would it's sort of like you're trying to follow like the ideal rational person.
Yeah, it's a habit too. It's also like I mean like virtue. So like virtue, I like virtue ethics a lot. Kind of as I've like gone, I've liked it more and more. And it's this idea of like, look, you're
Character building.
yeah, you're just trying to like pursue the good and live a good life,
And it's not measured by following a set of rules or being good, like in one instance, like, oh, you're a good person because you did this.
Yeah.
Virtue is measured over the course of somebody's life, like after they're dead, like over the course of their life, like how straight of a path did they live, and you know what was their day-to-day habits, and what was their character in different situations,
Well,
like
it's
when
also-
they're tested or something.
Well, it's also sort of the thing of like, I mean, I think maybe, I don't know if this is true of epistemologists, but like certainly I think in virtue ethics we might say something like this, like it's not so much knowing like facts about the world is like important, but probably it's also more important knowing about how to find out facts about the world, like having the sort of like character that you know how to go about doing it and doing it in a way that is like, I guess conducive to like practicing your virtue in a community, right? Because like presumably, like virtue ethics is very, it's very much emphasizes like virtue is something you have to do with others, right? It's not something you can kind of like do in a vacuum chamber. It's something that takes like a good amount of practice. You can't just like sit there and throw a ball against a wall and be a virtuous person. It doesn't work. So part of like being a virtuous knower or a virtuous like person in the epistemic sense is engaging with other people.
Right. Just like knowledge is it's largely a cultural thing. Like
Yeah.
science and methodologies and practices and procedures are passed on through scientific institutions that is not like peer review or double-blind experiments are not really like naturally intuitive. You have to be taught that. But once you're taught it, then it's like then you can apply it. And so yeah, it's like following sort of finding the best of what's been tested and tried and tested and sticking to that. And yeah, being sort of open to counterintuitive things that are,
But it's also knowing like the right time to apply certain like epistemic tools, right? So if you ask that, if someone hands you a math problem, it's probably not a good idea to enter into the calculator over and over again, seeing if you ever get a different answer. Seems weird. Like so, the scientific method in that case would not be a good solution. Right? Don't test it until it fails, because it won't. 2 + 2 = 4 will always equal 4 in every possible world. But then there's other times where you're like, well, I want to know this other thing, and maybe then you should employ the scientific method. Then so it's not only about like knowing, but it's also knowing how to apply the right epistemic tool at the right time in the appropriate way to the appropriate degree. So go to ask a question, and sometimes that's actually the virtuous thing to do. Sometimes it's to look it up. Sometimes other things. So there's many virtues.
Yeah.
In knowledge.
virtue epistemology gets deep. But it's not trying to analyze knowledge
Yeah. No,
from this a priori. There's another thing we could talk about, I thought, that's like with testimony, yeah, and like the norms of assertion. Right? Like there's epistemologists sometimes, I don't know if this is worth bringing up. Do you have anything more on the slide? Or?
No, this is actually the last one. Well, there's one more after this, but.
Or maybe we should talk about skepticism. That's kind of central to knowledge, if we have time.
What time is it?
8:18.
Would we have like 12 minutes?
Sarah did make a comment.
We can talk about skepticism.
You're
So
right.
like one of the concerns about knowledge is that, another concern with like the reductive approach is that whenever you like, look at it, it's like it disappears. So the more you analyze knowledge and justification in particular, like the more you look at it, the more it seems to dissolve. So like this is a problem with skepticism. Like when you ask someone like, well, how do you know you're not dreaming right now? Without relying on any of your mental faculties, you can't. Like you can't really give like any sort of justification. I mean, like Descartes kind of tried. He's like, well, dreaming and being asleep is like there's like a phenomenal distinction, which is like, well, okay, fine, but how do you know you're not dreaming a phenomenal distinction? You're kind of stuck there. I mean, external world skepticism is something. It's like it's unclear to take. Well, some people should take seriously.
Yeah, so there's like limited skepticism and like global skepticism, right? So you can be like you can be a local skeptic about maybe like religion or about certain scientific claims or certain
certain realms where people make, like maybe in ethics, you can be like a ethical skeptic about the truth of certain ethical propositions or any of them. So your skepticism can be kind of like localized, or it can be, there are skeptics who think knowledge is not possible to anyone. They're just like global
But
skeptics.
that's self-defeating.
Well, maybe.
If
Maybe
no
just
one has knowledge,
maybe
we
that's
don't
just a
have it.
brute fact of the world. It's like there's like this Pyrrhonian skepticism where like we can believe things, maybe we can like rationally sort of believe things, but knowledge is like something that we can't ever achieve.
Well, yeah, but then that's real great justification.
Yeah, I don't
for
know.
that view.
I'm
don't
that's not very many
It's
people hold that view these
So
days.
pretty much anything living you go like,
But
well,
there's
it's
like-
problematic. Like,
there's like
we have no
common-
knowledge, and we can't have knowledge of that either.
There's common problems like in modern philosophy, well, it goes all the way back, but about just like, how do we justify our belief that there is an external world, like a mind-independent world? Like that you're not just dreaming all of this, or that we're not all in the matrix or something. Like, how is it that we know that? How are you justified to believe that? What do you guys think? It just seems obvious. Like, can you make an argument for it?
What,
Like that there is a table here, and it's not just some
You're not dreaming.
some delusion.
so like the knowledge, my
How do you know
personal
you're not
knowledge
in the
that there is a table here. Yeah, how do I know? We don't know.
How do we know there was anyone else here? Like, not even that there's an external world, but like that any of you were real.
Yeah, no, we
Right
don't
into
know.
that.
No, that's
You're
another-
not just,
That's
like-
another question is
Almost.
knowledge of other minds.
Yes.
Like I can only know that I have a mind. I can't know. I just am kind of like assuming
Assuming
that
that
you
you-
guys have minds like I have a mind.
Unless it's like we're like the simulation.
Right. If you
Oh, yeah.
or you could be like a philosophical zombie where you have all the external appearances of having behavioral outputs that make it seem like you have a mind. Like if I give you a lemon and you bite into it and you go like this,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
it seems like you have this mental state, but
Mhm.
maybe you're just a philosophical zombie and you're just like a robot who
Yeah,
just does
pre-
that.
like pre-programmed.
But there's nothing going on inside. It's completely
Mhm.
blank. The lights are out on the
Mhm.
inside.
No qualia.
And if that,
You
I
don't
mean,
taste or feel.
and so that's
I give you one of these, you wince, but you don't taste sour.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no sensation of
Yeah,
sour.
there's no way to know.
and so you know things like basically deductively and inductively. And I can't know that anyone else has a mind deductively. That's way too strong, right? You can't deduce that someone has a mind. But it's also like not inductively evident either, because the same evidence could go to support a robot who has no mind at all.
Mm-hmm.
Evidence
Yeah.
neutrality.
So it's a question in philosophy, just like how do we know that other people that other minds exist?
Exactly, that's always a strange one. There's an interesting also possibility, because it's technically an infinite amount of possibilities, but there's one that was prevalent in this.
Except the possibility that 2 + 2 does not equal 4.
It probably it equals fish in another dimension. but yeah, I see what you mean. But it was actually brought up in a hip hop album by Logic. I don't know if you guys heard it. It's called Everybody, and it's like this concept that like everybody that's in the world is just you at a certain period of time. So like whenever you die, you go back to a quote unquote waiting room, and you are sent back or forward in time in the living the life of another human being.
Isn't this like Brahmanism? So like,
Kinda like
in Hindu theology they say like,
Reincarnation and
everyone is
Plato
reincarnated.
mixed together.
Exactly.
So what do you think about that?
I like that. I like that idea. I'm just not sure. Like I would much rather believe a simulation than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I kind of like it because there's a better ethical underpinning for it.
It's like
where
we're
everyone's you.
yeah, literally you're just harming yourself.
Yeah.
You're
It's a
loving
pretty
yourself.
shitty thing to do.
That's such a weird view.
It is a weird
No,
thing,
no,
but
this is a
I've
view-
never thought of that.
This is a view, so there's a view in it must be, I think it's Brahmanism. So it's like the Hindu, so like there's Brahma, the one all thing, and so like as a way to entertain itself, it like takes different avatars, and so everyone is just Brahma at different times and different places.
But the
doing different
Brahman
things.
is not like really a conscious entity like we are conscious.
Well, so
It's just like
yeah,
universal
super-
oneness.
it's like super conscious.
It's above consciousness.
Yeah,
So no, but so that's the thing is like as a way to like step down, it like forgets and then goes and does its
Yeah.
own thing. I'm just yeah.
But
so there's that
actually, so like in this album, it's
the
weird.
makes
It's a weird thing to
more
think
sense.
about. Well, like in this album, like it's like, so once the person dies, they go to this waiting room, and they're met by quote unquote God, which is actually played by Neil deGrasse Tyson.
What?
It was the greatest thing ever.
What?
But he goes to this waiting room, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, like his character is playing like a god, quote unquote.
Right.
And he was saying that once you live the life of every human being that has ever existed and will exist in all the universes, then you'll become a being like.
Yeah, that's like
Which is
that sounds like Hinduism.
yeah, it's interesting. I'm uncultured, so I'm not.
It's a long time. That was
It's a long time,
times.
but you get.
But you forget. That's the point. Is that like every time you go through
Yeah.
it, you forget, and then you start again, and then
We take a little bit back. Maybe.
Yeah.
Who knows? It's weird.
That sounds pretty metaphysical,
How
speculative.
But it's interesting. I don't know. Just
did we
weird.
get to that?
I completely brought it into a little bit of a tangent, but I kind
No,
of
but
it just
we're on something.
we're like really like talking about the possibilities of like how do you know
Oh,
whether
simulation. Oh
yeah,
yeah.
how do you know whether you
people
guys are
online.
all human beings
So how do
or
you
it's
know?
all simulation? And it just brought me onto that.
How do you know you're not in that? Because if you would have forgotten, even if you were, so that yeah, that's a nice built-in part of the story. You know if you were or you weren't, because if you are, you forgot, and if you weren't, then you wouldn't know it either.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I like epistemology is actually like applying it to people. People make all kinds of claims like about metaphysics, about we live in a computer simulation. You know, what is it? Elon Musk is saying that.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
like religious claims, like
Tyson
people
said that, so.
people claim that like mystics. People claim to have like direct personal encounters with divine beings, like Jesus spoke to me and stuff like that. You know, and it's like you can ask them like, well, how is it that you know that? You know, and like, how do you catch that in terms of like it being a piece of knowledge as opposed to just like a belief or something you just made up or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's lots of categories you can apply it to. And then when you study knowledge, you study like the, philosophy of science and stuff like that, mathematics, like how we come to different kinds of knowledge. And I think it makes you more aware of like, because there are people that make a lot of claims that are just like kind of wacky and studying this stuff sort of, at least for me, like helps put some things in perspective.
Yeah. And also there's like, I think there's things that,
You kind of get more critical.
I think there are sort of like things that are, I mean, so it becomes a big question, I mean, like from like the metaphysics standpoint, not to get too into metaphysics, but you do start wondering like the unknowable facts of the matter, right? So Kant had this like distinction between like, was it noumena and phenomena? So
That's what,
yeah, so there's like the phenomenal world, which is presumably what we have epistemic access to. And then there's the noumenal world, which is like the world as it is, and where that line sort of is, like, is there, and so there's like, this comes up in ethics a lot, is like, well, I take it that there's very ethical facts, but I also occupy a really weird position, like, I think there's ethical facts, but they may be unknowable. And there's certain things like, so for instance, you could like do it with God, but like whether or not there's an odd or even number of stars in the universe, there's a fact about that. I'm not counting them all. I don't know how we would figure that out, but there's a fact. It seems unknowable. Same with God. Like either there's God or there isn't. That's
like,
just like a brute fact. Like, is it knowable? Probably not.
it's
Like,
an unknown. Like Donald Rumsfeld was talking about this in a press conference when they were talking about weapons of mass destruction.
Rumsfeld in an interesting context here.
And Donald Rumsfeld gave 3 categories of different kinds of facts. There are known knowns, like facts that we know, that we know, like the Earth is the 3rd planet from the sun. It's a known known. but then there's unknown. No, there's known unknowns. Like how many planet or how many stars, if it's even or odd. We know there's some fact to be known, but we just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's a known unknown.
Yeah.
But then there's unknown unknowns, which is there are
We don't
facts
even
that are
know.
out there that we don't even know that we
Exactly.
don't know them.
Yeah, that's cool.
And that's kind of like constantly maybe
Yeah.
what you were bringing that back to that.
Yeah.
Where there's like a noumenal world, a noumenal realm of like things in themselves where we just don't have access to things that are kind of beyond our categories of mind or beyond our mental, cognitive faculties to even
Beyond
even
space
know.
and time.
Yeah, things that
Just
exist timelessly, things that don't exist in
Mhm.
space. We just have no way to even perceive them or know them at all. There's no like, Kant was in like doing like metaphysics of mind, about like categories of the mind, and you have to
But
sort of
yes,
like,
I mean, it's funny because we're coming to
like
that
so
point,
Kant's,
and it's like if you think about like the way physics is progressing, we are getting to the point where we may be like observing things that
but we can,
don't like really exist in space.
but
and time.
science can sort of buttress
You can,
the
yeah.
noumenal side. So
You
Kant
can.
had the Copernican revolution in epistemology, where before it was like John Locke was talking about the mind is a blank slate, and babies are born, and it's like an empty bookshelf, and it's just filled with stuff, and minds just absorb things, like it's a blank slate that sort of gets filled in, and then Immanuel Kant comes along and is like, no, it's not a blank slate. It's your mind has to like reach out and meet the world, like light comes into your eyes and sound waves in your ears. Your mind literally has to like, well, figuratively reach out and make sense of the data through these like categories of the mind, and it puts it like, the stuff has to sort of fit into the categories, or the categories are made to fit the facts that we can make sense of, and then only then can we like know things. So like some religious claims or some religious arguments go beyond the categories of the mind, like it's talking about timeless things, or like the beginning of time, or the first cause arguments and stuff. And he's saying like, well, once our concepts go beyond our sort of ability to conceive, we don't know what we're talking about, we don't know those things. But like science maybe can to like have these sort of add-on procedures or methodologies or instruments that can help us make sense of things that we can't like on our own by our own like thinking.
Yeah, they give us some way to synthesize them, or at
Yeah.
least like put them into some sort of terms. But even that, I mean, like, and that's actually funny because like when you talk about causation and one, it's like it's unclear that causation alone. I mean, how do you imagine that? We have like so we kind of can't imagine like the absence of it, I guess, because like it's part of, presumably it fits into our concept of time, right? And
Well,
so
you can't doubt it, and we're not. Yeah, you can't. It's like he was responding to Hume too.
yeah, he's responding to human constant production.
Where
Seems
Hume was just a skeptic of causation. And he's like, no, we don't have to be a skeptic. We can do like this transcendental deduction, and we can be certain that causation is a thing that we know, because without it, it's a precondition of intelligibility. You gotta have it.
yeah.
And so, yeah, Kant was the hardcore empiricist. Everything has to be a simple idea, or like a perception, an empirical sort of.
Transcendental idealist.
And then Kant comes along, as a transcendental idealist, and is like a realist, but about phenomenal or a noumenal world, whatever. But
Cosmology is something real interesting.
that's it.
Well, almost.
What's up with the iceberg, by the way? Like
The
tip of the iceberg.
there's more to knowledge than we know. I don't know. It looked cool, and I was like, it works. But I looked at the next applied to experience. It's just something it's a process.
Who's Robert and
He wrote Zen and the Art of Motorcycles. Yeah, Zen and the Art of Motorcycles. Writing. I'm reading it right now. I should probably know that off the top of my head. Yeah, it's Zen and the Art of Motorcycles. It's like a classic book. It was like, he wrote it, and it was his sort of, it's basically a book about values. That's the best way to describe it. So he goes on this road trip with his son across the country on a motorcycle, and it's just like he's talking about kind of philosophy and about what matters. Yeah, so then so the iceberg was like, So it's like knowledge is like this.
An analytic thought.
Like JTB is like the top of the iceberg or the bottom, and then there's like this part, whichever way you turn it, that you're missing.
Mhm.
I guess that's the best way to think of it.
Yeah, that's probably right. JTB, yeah.
Yeah.
The
There's a lot
justified
of it.
true belief is like most of it, but then some of it falls outside.
Yeah. It's up above the surface. And
Oh,
it's like,
you have some things that you just can't capture.
yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so Getty's examples are pretty cool. If you can come up with people have spent their whole lives writing about them, so it's a good philosophical career track. I need to like come up with like a better example of why I don't like case one. There's something there. I need to go back and read Frege.
It just doesn't feel.
I'm sure there's been laws
No.
written on Gettier.
No, there's something about the semantics of case one that just bugs me. But that's because I think, yeah. Anyway, so that's that. Oh well, next time we're gonna have.
Yeah, what's next?
Hopefully, we're gonna have the undergraduate club.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Then we want to do like a some social.
Where is that going to
Here
be
or
happening?
here?
Yeah.
How many people coming? Oh my gosh.
Well, I was gonna reach out to like the lecturers and see if they want to come by.
Yeah.
A couple other people.
Wait, so you're not taking classes?
I'm done. I'm graduating.
You are?
He is.
Yes,
You are.
maybe, I guess.
I'm alone. I have no more access to the ASU library. He had to download. I'm sad.
Yo, just be like my dad and just like ask if you
I
want to.
might have to do that.
Do it. I don't care.
Well, I'm actually, so my next thing is Professor Klein's book called Defining Sport. It's like, it comes out on August 15th, so I'm gonna read through that and see if he wants to come. Cause like, he does a lot of applied ethics stuff, and so like, I think it'd be really interesting. Do you have it
Well,
already?
No, there's people still on.
Oh.
Ask them if they have any more questions. We're still here.
Yeah, hold on.
We're here for your questions.
It does have a little bit of delay.
7 seconds.
Please ask questions. I think Sarah and Matt are on, or some. Hold on. Maybe.
What you want to know?
Is there?
You could ask us anything.
Oh, we were talking about this in the chat, but
Ask us anything.
so we're talking about this in the chat, but let's see. So Sarah and Matt, they were looking at their snacks here, and
Yes,
they're
they're
just
snacks.
like crying on the inside because they're like, here, and I was like, yo, you should come in
There were
person.
hella good snacks.
And yeah, they're good snacks. And and Sarah was like, what if you have like the in-home, like the in-home philosopher's pack? And I was thinking, well, we have like a merch slash subscription service where like we'll send you like a snack pack. And and Matt was like, what if it said so basically the pack will include Sour Patch Kids, an unread book bookmarked at some random location in the book, and what was the last? And and a cell phone with downloads on speed dial.
Let's do it.
Monetize
It would
that
have to be
subscription.
like a jitterbug. You could a jitterbug with dominoes on a speed dial. For
Okay.
large fingers.
And
I can't dial the phone.
partnership with Domino's done. But Sarah's it's not a question. It's just like she was wondering if there's any recommended reading. She wants some recommended.
For
You-
what?
so you did give the knowledge as acceptable testimony by
Yeah, that's like a really expensive book.
Really?
And, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, 'cause like.
thing.
And it's
No,
like a-
no PDF.
Yeah,
Free
no.
PDF online.
Yeah, I mean, there's.
Maybe maybe something pertaining to knowledge.
If they're
Pertaining to
really interested, just go to Amazon and get an anthology on epistemology.
Or get one of those. What's
That's the best thing to do because you get all the.
Anthology on epistle.
It's just like a textbook. Basically, what they do is
It's like a reader.
they
Which is like article.
people philosophers compile the like most famous and relevant philosophical articles of the last ever, all the way back to Plato, and you can just buy an anthology and it's all in there, and it's the best. You can find stuff you wouldn't normally read.
One of the ones where it's like they're like intro, they're small. I have one on philosophy of mind. I can't think of what it's called.
Oh yeah, like those
Talking about-
Cambridge.
Yeah, they're short,
readers.
short. They're like 200 pages, and they're
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Or so if you
Those are
Google
good.
if
Those
you
are
Google
good.
like an
That's
introduction to epistemology
Stanford Encyclopedia. Just go to the Stanford Encyclopedia and read their article.
or this textbook is good. Richard Feldman,
Oh yeah. Oh
book on epistemology.
it's just like he's an evidentialist, so he shits all over non-evidential.
Okay,
stuff,
so
but it's
really
good.
quick, and maybe a little bit of a louder voice, books that you recommend,
Books.
or things to do, things to do.
Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And just look up what you're looking for.
And also the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, IEP.
Oh,
That's like easier to read than Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and they have well-written articles on it. You can just Google a lot of stuff. Like sometimes I find, like some of my favorite professors, if you go to their faculty page, a lot of times they have like recommended reading lists, or they'll have their own published work that you can read, and like, man, you can go to. There's so many people that have.
Papers.org.
Yeah, well,
They have
they-
free stuff sometimes.
Yeah, that's not accessible. Like,
Yes, that's true.
yeah, I have access to JSTOR, so I can go and search like any academic article. If people are in college and have access to like academic journals, and they have like that search feature in their library, then you can print out.
That's for days.
You can find any academic article and print it out.
On epistemology.
I seriously have like file cabinets full of stuff I printed out.
And what's IEP stand for?
Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
That's like most of the things I read. Like, if I'm researching anything,
Yeah, you just
I'm
get a
just
quick
there.
introduction to it.
Or just make sure I've covered things and like I haven't forgotten anything major.
But
It's
forgetting,
like that
I mean, if
stuff.
you really want to get into it, like there's certain really famous articles in epistemology, like Quine's Two Dogmas of Empiricism, something like that. It's like a good, he attacks like analytic synthetic distinction and reductionism about like meaning, and it kind of gives you, I mean, that's kind of more advanced, but like,
I don't even think I ever got to wine. Yeah.
yeah, I'd say if you're just getting into it, like start with these.
Start with like Descartes and like
Oh, no,
no, maybe don't start with Descartes, but
Read
some of
Kant's
the moderns.
Critique of Pure Reason. That's where you start.
That's like my
I'm still not through it.
my friend's
I'm trying to
girlfriend
read
was
it.
reading that for fun, and I don't know why. I would never. It's so long. It's just like
I read most of it. I mean, I've read like the important stuff.
I read like History of Modern, and I had to go back to it for like one other class. Oh well.
Once you get past like it's just so in depth, and it's so like
the German.
his
It's
own
the German.
lexicon. You're reading it like, wait, what the fuck are you saying? So yeah, that's why like if you read the modern stuff, it's a lot better.
Yes.
And then also there's also cool stuff on YouTube. You know,
Yeah.
you can there's a lot of philosophy
Crash
channels.
course.
Yeah, exactly. So there's really good like videos, or they have like they draw on the whiteboard and they like
Mhm.
you know talk over it.
Yeah, those are good.
Those are helpful with some basic philosophy
Actually, okay, one more time. Internet Encyclopedia, what?
of philosophy.
Of philosophy.
Yeah, and Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Although Stanford Encyclopedia is definitely more, it's weird to say trade oriented, but they're also like really good sources for articles because they're gonna touch on all like the big things you need to know. Because like basically they have faculty at universities updating them regularly, so it's kind of like a state. It's kind of like a state of debate in one place. So they're going through all the issues that are like important or like historically relevant and contemporarily relevant. So if you're gonna go like there, you're gonna see this is kind of the state of the literature right now, and there you can like get into the weeds as much as you want, but it's helpful. I mean, a lot of the epistemic issues are like pretty well. Yeah, they're pretty well established at this point. I don't know if there's anything like real. Well, I don't know. Someone was like, there's this whole.
Yeah, maybe not. Well, anyways, I think.
You know this damn country? Yeah. Well, because like Sham had this whole like section on feminist epistemology, which I know nothing about, but apparently is quite interesting. So I have to go read an article about that when I go home. Sham, Professor, Nair. He taught an epistemology seminar, and he did a whole section on feminist epistemology that I would just.
What did you do?
I don't know anything about it. I was like, there's apparently this field. I know nothing about it. So
Interesting.
if someone has some knowledge, please share. I don't, I'm not a knower on that. Yeah. Yes, we'll do that, and then we'll probably, I don't know, I feel like we should talk about, we've done ethics, kind of, we've done epistemology, kind of. We should pick something like, different field, metaphysics.
Yeah, literally just about the same metaphysics.
Tons of other ideas.
Yeah, that we can talk about in a bit, but as a wrap up, that was a really good, insightful talk.
Hope so. That was a
Um,
simple.
Oh yeah, something that we didn't do last time. Thank you, Alex, for making this presentation. This little clap. It's like, no, it was very awesome. But yeah, thanks for watching, everybody.
Bye. See you in a
See you
couple
guys
weeks.
later. Yeah, have.
Tell your friends.
It's on here. Tell your friends. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Turn post notifications on. Done. Okay, awesome. See you guys later.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe, leave a comment below. Okay, cool.
I need my phone back. I always like hope my girlfriend doesn't have like anything horrible happen while I'm here, because I won't get the notification. Oh, we're good. Done? Yay.